Hi everyone. Welcome to the 29th Celebrity Typing live stream. So just some quick announcements before we get into it. I have been doing a little bit of work on the Discord server. I'm very grateful to Isaac for taking on the moderation of that Discord server, the World Socionic Society Discord server. If anyone of you want to join, I think you can find out the link to that just by looking on some of the social media details and some of the videos on YouTube or on the About section of my YouTube channel. But yeah, I've added a private channel on there. And that private channel is exclusively for people who have purchased the Type Mastery Pathway, who have begun their journey to becoming master socionists. I should say that yeah, it's open to people who have purchased the course, but also people who have completed the course, as well as people whom I consider to be so adept at socionics that they don't need to take the course. They're already fantastic. So any one of those groups would be have been added to that private channel, but saying that I have missed most people who belong to that. So if you're someone who's purchased the course, or if you're someone who has completed the course, please PM me on Discord or even comment here with your username, and I'll be able to find you and add you to that private channel on the Discord server. So yes, please do that so you can be part of that. I used to have a Facebook chat for this, but Facebook stopped doing group chats, which is why it sort of faded away. So we have now transitioned that to the Discord server. So please get in touch if you'd like to be part of that and talk to other people who have taken the course or are currently taking the WSS type past type mastery pathway. All right. So, in terms of what to do for me to type someone in this live stream, the rules are pretty simple. You got to make a super chat. That's a super chat of at least $20. If you want me to prioritize yours over someone else's, let's say there are multiple super chats and you want to be the next in line, then if you do a larger amount than $20, I'll prioritize you. But yeah, that's the idea. Do a super chat of $20 and I will look at whomever you want me to look at, provided they are someone who is a public figure, someone for whom there's enough information online for me to have a look at them in this live stream and form a typing conclusion on them. But I'll look at anyone, whether alive or dead, no matter what country they're from, no matter what field or area of interest they're in, no matter if they are a very niche figure, a band member, a politician, an artist, some sort of notorious psychopath. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I'll look at any of them. You just need to make a super chat of at least $20. So, without further ado, I will start with Isaac's super chat, which is for me to take a look at Walter Simonson. And given that he has said he has undergone a relapse, I'm assuming this is another wonderful Marvel or DC Comics writer or illustrator. So I'm looking forward to this one. Walter Simonson. Who is this? American comic book writer, of course. Oh, okay. Looks like he's done. Is that Thor? Oh, he's done Thor. Okay, pretty cool. Let's take a look. I mean, that's Odin, that picture there. But yeah, Walter Simonson is an American comic book writer and artist, best known for a run on Marvel Comics Thor. I'm going to go to Wikipedia. I prefer Wikipedia. Let's go to Wikipedia. Yes, there we go. Walter Simonson, American comic book artist, writer, has acclaimed runs, both writer and artist in Marvel Comics. The Mighty Thor, there we go. That makes sense. Hence the pictures of Odin there, during which he introduced the fan favorite character Beta Ray Bill and revitalized a series of innovative storytelling and dynamic artwork. I mean, the idea of introducing Beta Ray Bill is pretty cool. So, yeah, the whole point of Thor is that he's not really a Norse god, he is an alien. an alien from a planet with technology that's so advanced it's basically magical. So it's almost following that train of thought. There would be other aliens which Thor may interact with. He's sort of an intergalactic figure. So I guess that's what Beta Ray Bill is, an alien to an Asgardian, something not an Asgardian who can wield his hammer. That's pretty cool. So yes, he introduced a fan favorite character, Beta Ray Bill, and revitalized the series with an innovative storytelling and dynamic artwork. He did both the artwork and the storytelling. Born in 1946 in Tennessee, he developed an early interest in comics and pursued formal training at Amherst College and the Rhode Island School of Design. His senior thesis became the foundation for his creator-owned series, Star Slammers. He began his professional career in 1972 with contributions to titles such as Weird War Tales and quickly built a body of work across DC and Marvel, including Metal Men, Hercules Unbound, and licensed adaptations like Alien and Battlestar Galactica. All right, what can we see here? He began reading comics as a child through his younger brother's subscription to Walt Disney's comics and stories. By 10, he was an avid admirer of Carl Barks' Duck Stories. He displayed a talent for drawing from a very young age, developed an early fascination with Norse mythology. Hence Thor. Um, Initially pursued a degree in geology at Amherst College. Plans to attend graduate school and become a paleontologist. That's interesting. Okay. An interest in history, looking at things from the past, looking at rocks, basically, it's geology. Like drawing dinosaurs. Um, and once he discovered Marvel, specifically the 4 series, he then shifted towards the arts. But he did graduate with a geology degree. So he's quite a he's a nerdy figure more than just comics. It's also digging things up, being interested in dinosaurs. Um, he enrolled at the Rhode Island School of Design as an illustration major. He honed his skills in design, typography, and visual storytelling. What else? Before his published debut, he wrote the Star Slam as his college thesis project, which helped attract attention from DC Comics and led to his first professional assignment. He co-founded Upstart Associates, a shared studio space, alongside Howard Chaykin, etc., and Jim Starlin. Okay. The collective allowed the artists to pool resources and support each other's work. He remained involved with the student until late 1986. His breakthrough was on Manhunter. The series reimagined the classic character Paul Kirk, a big game hunter turned masked vigilante, through Goodwin's torch scripts and Simon's dynamic, expressive artwork that blended realism with bold action sequences. He started with the artwork. This short but influential run, commenting on the team up with Batman and a tragic conclusion, drew widespread praise for its innovative storytelling and visual energy. And this is forum. He introduced the fan favorite character Beta Ray Bill. It's important to note, given his interest in Thor, he went for this deliberately, I'm sure. Into the fan favorite character Beta Ray Bill, a noble alien warrior from the destroyed world of Corbin, who's worthy to lift Mjolnir and briefly claims the hammer. Beta Ray Bill's debut um, established a new dynamic for Thor with themes of worthiness beyond Asgardians and expanding the mythology with extraterrestrial elements. And the idea here is expanding beyond. It's almost including people from outside of the Asgardian mythos. So that's kind of an expansive sort of alternative take approach and saying, well, technically a non-Asgardian could lift the hammer, so why don't you get a Thor that isn't Thor and is not even Asgardian? Science to further enrich Thor's rogues gallery, introducing Malekith the Accursed. Ruthless leader of the Dark Elves, whose schemes involve the casket of ancient winters. Creations and ensuing narratives emphasize grand fantasy, mythological depth, and high-stakes action, drawing Simon's long-standing interest in Norse legends that dated back to his childhood. Before his defining period as a writer-artist, he contributed pencils to four issues, working under other writers, getting early familiarity with the title. 1983, around the start of his four run, he published his creator-owned epic Star Slammers as a Marvel graphic novel. And that served to showcase his distinctive style. Hmm. There's some degree of strategy there. So I'm going to do this before this in order to get to this position, potentially. He just sort of wander in. He ended up there quite deliberately, I think. X Factor and Fantastic Four. He said the penciler on Marvel's X Factor to pick him up at the beginning of his professional collaboration with his wife, Louise Simonson, who wrote the series during that time. The husband and wife team brought distinctive energy to the title, which focused on the original X-Men lineup of Cyclops, Jean Grey, Iceman, Beast, and Angel. And they notably established Apocalypse as a major recurring villain in the X-Men mythos. That's interesting because Apocalypse is also, an ancient, almost godlike being with technology that seems almost magical. Of course, Egyptian rather than Norse, anyway. Hmm. He returned to DC Comics after an absence, in the 1970s. Okay, since his early work in the 1970s, he launched a series of Orion as both a writer and artist. Ah, that's interesting. So going on to Jack Kirby's Fourth World mythology, the New Gods, similar sort of idea, dealing with the Asgardians and now the New. It's a similar sort of area of focus. He likes the big and grandiose, clearly. It does observing schemes while Orion confronted threats tied to his heritage and destiny. His dynamic art and inventive storytelling brought fresh energy to the cosmic saga. He next wrote Wonder Woman. Okay, another sort of godlike figure. She's from Themyscira. She is the daughter of, I think she's meant to be the daughter of Zeus. Um, took over writing on Hawk Girl. Okay, he's scripting through issue 66. For Kendra Saunders' Hawk Girl, set over in St. Roche while facing new villains and threats. Even Hawk and Hawkman have certain ties to Egyptian mythology to some degree, and of course, aliens, which another seems to be another theme here. Alien gods. Um, we're interested in the graphic novel Judas Coin, presenting one of the 30 pieces of silver paid to Judas through centuries of history, connected to various figures across the DC universe. Okay. Did Elric the Making of a Sorcerer. Definitely prefer fantasy or technology that's so advanced it looks like fantasy, looks like magic. Um, so what is Star Slammers about? Look into that. What is his impact on comics? He's credited with revitalizing and redefining the Mighty Thor character during his influential runs as writer and artist in the series, bringing dynamic art and a deeper integration of Norse mythology, setting a new standard for the title. His bold, kinetic style and epic storytelling approach influenced subsequent creators, establishing a modern template for the character that emphasized mythological depth and visual energy. He created Beta Ray Bill and Malekith the Accursed, the major antagonist whose designer role expanded the Thor mythos in lasting ways. He advocated for creative rights and ownership through his work on the Star Slammer series, which began his college thesis project, which was later published in formats such as graphic novel. His approach with Ragnarok, a creator-owned series, reimagined Norse mythology outside corporate ownership. He co-founded Upstart Associates, a New York studio space with artists, including Jim Starlin and others, which fostered long-term collaborations and supported the creative community during a key period in the comics history. So he's someone who's quite able to work with others. He worked with his wife for a good amount of time. He's not a loner figure. Um, he made a cameo appearance as one of the Asgardians. Interesting. Right. Let's see. Let me look at Star Slammers briefly before we look at some YouTube content. It centers on a race of exceptionally skilled mercenaries who organize themselves into a highly successful business enterprise by selling their combat expertise across the stars. So it's a bit like, is it like what's it called? What's it called? One with Groot. What's it called? Can't remember now. What is it called? I'm tip my tongue. What is it called? Guardians of the Galaxy, that's it. Is that a similar sort of idea? So to describe the corporate says once upon a time there's a race of men who could outshoot, outfight, and outkill anybody. They were paid fabulous sums to act as mercenaries. Perhaps became so lucrative they started to go into business. They're the most successful businessmen in history, and they called themselves the Star Slammers. When narratives blend high energy space opera action, including starship battle and interstellar warfare, more intricate elements such as hidden secrets, collective consciousness, and as a consequence of mercenary life within larger galactic empires. It's one of his most personal, long gestating projects, predating his acclaim of professional work on titles such as Four. Star Samus showcases distinctive dynamic artwork, influenced by Jack Kirby and manga styles, with bold character designs and complex page composition that emphasize epic scale and movement. Hmm. All right. Some of the themes. Mercenary society. This idea that they are sort of go it alone, hard-nosed businessmen. That's interesting. Star Citizen explores profound moral ambiguities, its depiction of interstellar warfare, centering on the looming threat of genocide orchestrated by the Orion Empire against the exiled people who became the Star Slammers. The Orion Senate, provoked by a failed hunting expedition where exiles fought back, killed a powerful senator, authorizes a massive armada to annihilate their home planet. So this genocide level conflict frames the narrative's violence as existential, and it pictures the Slammers unified through their telepathic silver mind link against the overwhelming Imperial forces in desperate events of survival. So it interrogates loyalty and betrayal within the mercenary framework. It stands pressure both a strategic necessity and the source of moral peril. Personal costs permeate the narrative, particularly characters like Ethon, whose childhood trauma, with his mother's instant death and his father's fatal resistance during an Orion hunt, feels a lifelong commitment to the group's survival. Okay. So good emphasis on character and so essentially personal moral struggles. Despite mixed assessment of his narrative complexity, it is a dedicated niche among Walter Simonson enthusiast prize and an early showcase of his distinctive artistic style and creative independence. All right, all right. Let's take a look at Walter Simonson. And Lala the Barbie, that's very kind of you. Thank you very much for your compliments. Um, I will certainly look at Aliyah if you make a super chat of at least $20. Right, let's take a look at Walter Simonson. Actually, have I looked at Aliyah before? 'Cause I don't want to look at the same person twice if I've already looked at them. I'm just checking that. No, I don't think I've looked at Aliyah. I haven't. So, yeah, if you make a super chat, I will type her. All right. Aliyah. Bigger name is it? C. Okay, cool. Right, let's look at Walter Simonson, the classic saga Walter Simonson's and Mighty Thor. Oh, it's what time of the Lord of the Rings. Interesting. I'll look at first. Look at this first.
One of my central influences creatively has been The Lord of the Rings. I read that when I was a freshman in college.
Surprising.
Just before it came out in paperback. My English teacher, William E. Coles, my second semester English teacher, loaned me his 3 volumes hardcover. I took those home and read them. And I met as much as you can when you're my advanced age. It's probably my favorite book. I mean, you have to become, blue is my favorite color. This is my favorite book. This is my favorite. This when I get older, eventually, well, I like blue here, but I may like green over here. You're not quite as locked into that stuff. But The Lord of the Rings may be my favorite book. I mean, probably still certainly one of my very favorites, and very influential on my thinking about how I tell stories, and probably the kind of stories that I like to tell myself and the way I tell them. One of my central influences creatively has been The Lord of the
I mean, not surprising given what we've already heard about him. Think of this.
I'm Mike Avila at Sci-Fi Wire's interview studio at San Diego Comic-Con. And today I am joined by Walt Simonson, the great Walt Simonson, who is also here promoting a brand new book from IDW, the Thor Artist Edition. And I mean, it is spectacular. I want you guys to get a good look at this. It's a behemoth of a book, befitting this legendary run. Don't mean to embarrass you and whatnot, but let's be honest. This is the Thor that for countless fans is the definitive run, which is saying something.
It's pretty cool imagery
that preceded you on this book. I lucked out. But about the book, putting these books together is always a challenge for IDW staff because they got to go and track down the artwork. It's a treasure hunt because the art is out there, floating around in the ether, buried in black hole collections. But you have always been smart enough to hold on to all your original art.
Well, I would like to say it's because I was bright enough to know that 40 years after I'd gotten the comics, they'd be doing artist editions, but that was not really it. Part of it is that in the very beginning when I was in comics, reproduction in comics was just, it was on newsprint, it was crummy paper, it was crummy printing, it went to plastic plates. If you drew a very fine line like that, it would turn into a sine wave, a very small sine wave, but you needed a bold style to really reproduce. And also, when you shrink things down, this is true for all illustration, all your mistakes get smaller. And the idea is that you can do something really large, and once it's really small, the mistakes become invisible, really. And so I wanted to be able to study my work and look at it and see where I'd screwed up and how I could not do that the next time around. So I made a habit of saving my art as early as I could. I got into comics before they were giving art back, but they eventually gave back what they could find. And so I kept it from then on. And then eventually, the late 70s, I sold a page. I got offered good money for it by those standards in 78 or whatever it was. And then I spent the money. I didn't have the page. I thought, what was the point of that? And I've been lucky enough that I haven't needed to sell the artwork in order to kind of make a living. Been very fortunate in that regard. So I didn't sell any more pages after that. And I just have like an old dragon, or I'm like Scrooge McDuck, my giant money pile. Sitting in a pile of pages, swimming at night, dive like a porpoise, and whatever it is that Scrooge did. And so I don't do any of that stuff. So I have a closet at home that's pretty high, and it turned out to be, I have a whole second career in artist editions. I have a bunch of them that have come out from different companies even, but mostly from IDW, and I'm really proud of this one.
Talk about finding those pages. So they call you. We want to do something special on the second volume.
That's right.
Of your Thor run, which ran almost 4 years.
Almost, yes.
Almost 4 years.
Interesting how you really wanted to check to make sure there are no mistakes.
Taking through pages once a week. Oh, look at this! How great was page 3 of issue 4? 390. But was it? Did it take you back to those times, like when you look and I'm just gonna open up a page at 349? 349, page 24. And you look at a page like this as you're putting them together. Like, do you remember like what you were thinking of? Because you were also writing the book.
I don't remember all the individual drawings I've done. At this point, I've done a lot of drawings. And my idea really is that I started drawing before I was 4, too young to remember. My mom told me, so I believed her. And I've done a lot of drawings since then, and it's all one big drawing. And eventually it'll all come out over here somewhere when I don't draw anymore, however that happens. So I don't remember the drawing specifically. This particular issue, I do remember. I'm often very late at my deadlines. If any of my former editors are watching this, they're going to be falling out of their chairs. Very late probably is an understatement. But this one, I was going to a convention in Spain. I'd never been to Spain before. I had to write an issue. And so this was before laptops. It's probably 80 or before laptops for me anyway. 85, somewhere in there, 84. And so literally I wrote it on a yellow pad, longhand on the airplane on the 7-hour flight to Madrid. And after I wrote it, I went back and I edited it. And then I began writing a clean copy. And then finally, when I was done, I was putting the last period on the script as we touched down in Madrid at 7 in the morning. It was a red eye.
Wow.
I was completely exhausted. My idea was I would find a FedEx office. I would deliver the stuff. I'd get it back to New York. There were no FedEx office. There was nothing. There was nothing. So 4 or 5 days later, I was in England before I came home. I called my wife up and I read her the script over the phone.
Wow.
Which she copied down, and then we sent the script in. So probably the most expensive script from my point of view that I've done in my career. But I remember that from this, and it worked out fine. I'm happy with it, but it was really. So I do think of stories like that, of different, when I see different pages from the art, I do think it's not the individual drawing, something about the stories I remember.
Beta Ray Bill is such an amazing character.
So why did you do that? Why was he in such a situation where he literally had no time? I was taking on too much potentially.
Cool. I mean, a couple of my characters made it in here and there, and I actually made it into the first Thor film. I have a cameo for about a nanosecond at the end of the movie at the banquet scene. I'm sitting just this left at the banquet scene. The actors were a riot. They were very kind to us. We had a great time. And it was a lot of fun. It made movie making look like it might actually be fun. But really, I mean, if they do a bill, my only real thing about that is my wife's had a couple of her characters in the movies. They've not always been great. And so what I would love to see, like in Thor Ragnarok, if Bill's not there, I get it, but I would love to see a good script. And we know now you take special effects for granted. They do a great job with all that stuff. I'd like to see good writing. I'd like to see a good story, good characterization. If they put Bill in there, I'd love to see him well done. And just for the record, this reproduction, this is the first drawing of Bill I ever did. I don't usually do model sheets because that's too much work. So I just draw the character. I had to do a poster for an advertisement for my run on Thor when I was starting out. So I drew this. I had the idea I wanted to do, what I wanted to do with the character. I had a lot of stuff figured out. And my first drawing was this drawing of Bill. And it worked out okay, so I stayed with it.
Right. What do I get from that? Potentially, there's a mix of perfectionism and also flying a little bit by the seat of his pants in terms of actually getting things over the line, but then want to do it really, really well at the same time. Combine that with his clearly very intellectual interest in mythology, in history, a focus on narrative and good writing. Okay. Got that all in my head at the moment. Let's see what else we can watch. Hmm. Well, actually, I think most people would have a favorite color, for instance. I think that what's interesting there is how qualified he was in saying, well, maybe that's the best, maybe that's my favorite of all time, or he's certainly up there. He qualified, he didn't go absolutely, that's my favorite. He didn't actually have much opinion on his favorite color, which is interesting. So,
How much time do we have?
so maybe something actually isn't so naturally oriented towards his personal likes and dislikes.
My parents had
You can do it somewhat.
And in our bookshelf at home, my dad had a bunch of books. It was from 1893, which is much older than I am, but it was an adult book. It wasn't a kid book about this stuff. I loved it. I loved the Norse myths. I love mythology in general. I really love the Norse myths. Maybe because when you're young, the Viking gods all die at the end of time. There's a big battle called Ragnarok.
Yep.
Ragnarok, the doom of the gods. And, you know, when you're young, death's far enough away, so maybe it's really cool. The older you get, maybe that's a little less true, but it was still really, it was fascinating. And so years later, when I was in college, in the mid-60s, I discovered Marvel Comics. I found a copy of Journey into Mystery, 120, which starred the Mighty Thor from Marvel Comics. I was wowed. There was a comic book about Thor, even though he didn't have a red beard, he didn't have iron gauntlets and a goat chariot and all the stuff in the myths. I didn't care. I thought it was fantastic. So I loved it. Not quite 20 years later, I was working in comics. I really got into comics because of that work, because of the Marvel work, really, in the mid-60s. Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, Don Heck, all the guys who did that work. Ultimately, I got into comics as a profession, really inspired by that work. And eventually at Marvel, I was offered the chance by Mark Grunwald, who was the editor of Marvel Comics, to take over the Mighty Thor, the comic book, as a writer and artist. At that time, I'd been drawing comics for a little over 10 years. I've been writing comics. I'd written maybe 7 or 8 stories by that time. I was really a new writer. I got it as an artist and then began writing. So I began writing and drawing the Mighty Thor. So it's very early in my career as far as work goes. And at the time, the book wasn't selling very well. And the good part about that is if it had tanked, everybody would say, oh, well, it tanked. You know, it wasn't really Walt's fault. You know, it just went to heck. And if it did well, they'd say, wow, what a genius. Well, I worked on it for about 3.5 years. I drew it for 2.5. All together, including a little mini series I did with
Doesn't take yourself too seriously.
I did 48 issues. So I love the Norse myths. I had a fabulous time doing it. Really enjoyed it. Eventually went on to other things. And then about 17 or 18 years ago, 2007, somewhere in the early 2000s, my friend Scott Dunberry, who was an old pal from New York, but Scott called me up. We were talking, and he said, how about doing and he was actually at the time just Wildstorm. So how about doing your own book about the Norse myth? I thought, sure, that's great. I've got a little work to do. Let me get my work done. I'll get back to you.
Yep.
15 years later, I was done about that work, and I called him up and said, okay. By that time, he was here at IW, and we talked about it, and I had an idea, and the idea was what became the book Ragnarok that I'm doing for IW now.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, I decided to do a story. Ragnarok is the doom of the powers, or called the Twilight of the Gods. It's the end of all things when the gods and their enemies fight each other and destroy each other. And the world burns and everything, the stars fall from the sky, everything sinks into the oceans, everything dies. And then the earth rises back out of the ocean. And it turns out that a man and a woman have survived in the deep woods, and that the children of the gods have survived in the highest halls of Asgard that were not burned in the great fires. And things begin anew. So I thought that those stories are already in books. You can read that stuff. You can buy a book in a bookstore. It's all there. I want to tell a story that hasn't been told. So my thought about it was, we'll have Ragnarok, but for whatever reason, and we won't know it yet, Thor was not at the great battle. Thor was the mightiest warrior of the Aesir.
What if?
And
Altist
not there
version of Ragnarok.
As a result, the Midgard serpent, this great world encircling serpent, survives, isn't killed by Thor, he is in stories. The result is the bad guys win. The gods are killed, the bad guys survive. And so you have a world, the 9 worlds, in which the bad guys take over. It's kind of a medieval world. And several hundred years, it's bad for people. Several hundred years later, Thor shows up again. He doesn't know what's happened. We don't know where he's been. We begin to find out as a mystery over the course of the book. And he finds out that all his family, all his friends, all his loved ones, they're all dead. He's the last surviving god. And as long as he's alive, Ragnarok isn't over. So he picks up his hammer, Mjolnir, the great weapon of the gods, and goes out into what's left of the 9 worlds to find the great enemies and talk to them sternly about the great battle and what happened there. So that's really what Ragnarok's about.
It obviously comes from a good place of great passion.
I love the stories, and I'm delighted to have a chance to go back and do more stuff with Norse myths in a way that I did not do when I was working at Marvel. And so it's also nice I don't have to do any crossovers. I don't have to do all this stuff you have to do in mainstream comics now.
About it.
I don't have to worry about it. So it's fun.
I've done that.
I have done that.
So this character of Beta Ray Bill, tell us a little bit about him and what his relationship to Thor is.
When I started doing Thor, and really any comic I do, I take over as writer artist. What I would like to do ideally is tell stories that you've not read before. I understand that's hard, especially I mean the time I took over Thor, they've been going for 20 years, which means all these combinations of the characters, they've all been done a lot. And so I thought about it, and I thought one of the things in the Marvel mythology, the hammer, Mjolnir, cannot be picked up by anybody who is unworthy. There's a description on the hammer, which sort of appears magically when it's needed and then disappears when you don't want to draw it. And it says, whosoever holds this hammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor. And I thought about that, and that was on the original hammer in the very first issue of Journey to Mystery 83, which was Thor's first adventure. And it changed a mild-mannered, lame physician into Thor. It worked out more stories about that. Eventually it became more elaborate. But really in the comic, nobody had ever picked up the hammer except for Thor and Odin in the length in those 20 years. And I thought there would be a cool story that no one's read. Exactly. If someone else turns out to be worthy of the hammer. So I thought I needed to design a character from the ground up who would be worthy of picking up the hammer. And that's how Bill was born. And one of the tropes in comics, and still I think kind of true, is that good guys are handsome, bad guys are ugly. I decided when I began drawing Bill, I decided to design Bill as a monster. You want to play fair with the readers, but
there is a balance. Exactly, I was thinking there's a balance of extrovert and introvert intuition going on here. There is a balance.
Here and we end the story here and surprise me. So with Bill, I made him a monster because I figured if he picks the hammer up,
I don't think he's an intuitive type.
Oh, he must be worthy.
I mean, he's not meeting his deadlines. He's flying quite close to the line on things. There's a huge amount of effort to get things over the line at the near last minute by the seat of his pants. Suggesting more intuitive, potentially more extroverted as well. I'm thinking.
Front teeth, a big gap behind a circular gap. Doesn't have a jaw. I don't know how it works. I don't care. It's a comic book. I don't have to worry about that. But that's really, I was a geology major and wanted to be a paleontologist originally when I was in school. And so we had a bunch of horse skeletons and early horse skeletons in the museum at the university where I went, college where I went. And so the head is based kind of on a horse's skull. I did not go back and look at the skull, but the horses had gaps back there. It's where the bit goes on a horse, and they put that stuff on when the harness is on. So I use that as a model for Bill. Part of that is because skulls generally we associate with death and with monsters or horror films or whatever. But at the same time, beauty is a matter of structure. And symmetrical structure. And the skull is really the basis for the structure for human beings and for animals. And so the skull itself is not only seen from the horror context, but it really is the structure that makes beauty possible. And so I like that idea because Bill's really a noble guy. So he has both in a thin theory. I mean, I did not expect readers to get this at all. And nobody wrote it at the time and said, oh, it's a horse's skull. I get it. Nobody said that. After I said it was a horse's skull, everyone goes, oh yeah, the horse had an alien. But before that, nobody said it. So I did a 4-part story with Bill, all of which is in this book. That was his introduction. And that was like the longest story I did during my run of the book. And really, it also involved Odin. In the Norse myth, Odin is very wise, and because of a sacrifice he made, giving up one eye, he knows a great deal, including probably the future and what's going to happen to the gods eventually. He knows there's going to be this great battle, and the battle plane is Vigrid. It's 100 leagues in every direction, and all the enemies of the gods will come there. The dead will come out of hell on a great ship made of dead men's nails, and the gods will come there when they will come with the Einherjar, who are the warriors of Valhalla, and the gods of Valkyries have chosen warriors from brave battles where the Vikings have died, and they take the brave dead and carry them off to Valhalla, where the dead will rise up in Valhalla, and they feast every night, and they go out and kill each other during the day, and they have these great battles. they get put back together and they go back to Valhalla and they see and they drink and they have a great time. They go out, so they're practicing up, and Odin is building up essentially an armed force to be there at the battle plane, even though in the end it's going to be everybody dies. And so, but Odin is always on the lookout. This is my feeling for fresh blood, new warriors who will be able to assist when the final battle comes. So he's interested in Bill. Once he finds out what's going on, makes a mistake at first. Nobody's perfect, but he finds out what's going on. And in the end, can I do spoiler warnings, or should I wait for people to actually have to read them? It's a really old comic. Basically, what Odin does once he understands Bill and Thor gets back to Asgard is they actually go to the dwarves who forged the original hammer, Mjolnir, and they have them forge a new hammer for Bill, so that Bill really becomes the equivalent of Thor with his own hammer, I call it Stormbreaker, as a tip of the hat to Michael Moorcock, who's a friend and a fabulous fantasy writer, and had a sword called Stormbringer. So Stormbreaker is my hammer. Bill has the hammer. This is the silhouette, the silhouette really of Thor's hammer. So drawing in the comic in the third issue, where I just took a copy of this drawing, changed the hammer into the silhouette of Bill's new hammer, so he could hold it up and have his own hammer, have Stormbreaker in his hands. Wow. So he gets the hammer, and Odin understands this guy is noble enough and altruistic enough and wise enough to be given this kind of devastating power and not misuse it. And so in a sense, he and Thor, they're really almost like brothers. So so then they become they're close, and other stuff goes on, but that's who Bill is. That's kind of how he was designed. That's why he was designed that way. And worked out pretty well. Oh, and the other thing about it, I called him Beta Ray Bill, which is a really goofy name. That's because I read a lot of science fiction when I was back in the 60s and 70s. And one thing about science fiction I always loved with the science fiction, the old pulp stories, where an alien would meet a human being. How like the human would have a little universal translator in his belt, and you go click, and it would all come out in English. They'd all be speaking English. But I thought, well, I don't know what Bill's real name is. I don't know how he would speak with that, because he doesn't have any lips. I don't know how that would actually work as far as vocalizations go. But I'm guessing his name isn't really Beta Ray Bill. But my feeling is that when they scrambled the universal translator, that's how it comes out. There are couple reasons for it. One is Bill he's the guardian of his own people, and he's kind of an everyman in his own culture. He's really not. He's really an incredibly heroic character. But he's like the everyman for them. So I wanted a common name. And so I thought about Jones, when it comes out of the translator, like Jones. But at the time, Marvel had Rick Jones, and they were doing Indiana Jones comic. My present wife, her maiden name was Jones. Her previous name was Jones before he got married. There's a lot of Joneses in Marvel comics, so I can't use Jones. So I thought about it, and I thought, William Bill is kind of a common name, at least in the West. And I thought, I'll use Bill. I wanted something that sounded kind of science fiction. Gamma rays are already taken by the Hulk. I didn't want to do anything related to the Hulk in this. And beta rays really aren't very powerful. Like they're loose electrons. They're not very powerful as far as rays go. But I love, Marvel was always with this fabulous alliteration going in their books, and the Stan used to write and stuff. And so I thought Beta Ray Bill sound had a literate quality, a nice scan. It scanned well, and even though it doesn't mean anything, I thought that's how his name came out of the Universal Translator. I didn't bother explaining all that stuff, but that's why the name is. That's how I.
There's a lot of thinking it puts into these things.
I wrote back then, reprinted in an art studio.
Well, I like seeing other people's stuff better. I see Jack Kirby stuff. I see it like twice up on these old pages, or I see Dave Stevens' Rocketeer. I love seeing the originals. When I was first in comics, I got into comics in 1972. I moved to New York. Back then, for all you young people out there was no web, there was no internet, there was no FedEx. We barely had fire. And so basically, you wanted to do comics for Marvel or DC, which were really the two adventure comic companies in the business then. You pretty much had to move to New York City, and you would bring your work into the office. You would physically carry your pages, and they would photograph them, and eventually they'd come back to you. Well, they didn't initially, but they eventually did. And so you really had to be in place at the time in order for that stuff to work. So I saw a lot of artwork come in. I'd be in the office, and I would see artwork stories by young guys and older guys. Older guys are younger than me, but older guys then. Joe Kuberts and Alex Toths and just everybody. Kurt Swan, Kirby work. And it was astounding to see, because back then comics were printed on newsprint, they were plastic plates. If you had a very thin line, it would come out like a little sine wave sometimes, like your straight line would disappear and become curved. Like, that was just the way it was. Comics are real different now in that reproduction and much, much better. But it did mean that seeing the work in the originals was really astounding. And of course, it was big.
Use that sine wave example quite often, I think.
Comic. It's this big compared to you. But when you're an adult, it's a lot smaller. So when you saw the originals, it had that large scale again. So one thing about the artist editions I love is seeing the work full size. I can be small again. I can see the scale of the work the artists have worked on. And especially in artist editions, you can see the mistakes and the corrections, and you can see, in a sense, the thought that goes into it in a way that once you clean it up and put it in print, you don't see that anymore. And I love seeing the artistic work in a way these books reveal. So, I know how I work, so I'm not as interested in seeing my own stuff. I'm delighted. I'm thrilled it's coming out. I'm very grateful to Scott for kind of putting all this stuff together. I know he wanted to for a long time before IDW gave him his head and sent him on his way. And now all these fabulous books. I have not gotten all of them. I don't have a room in my house for all of them, but I have some of the ones I love from artists whose work I absolutely love. And I'm thrilled that I have these books out, and I'm also thrilled that I'm not embarrassed by them. I go back and look at them and go, "Oh, that was terrible."
Let's try something else. What else is there on him? What is this about? Come on. Yeah, paleontologist. That's a connection.
Ever since his creation as a Marvel Comics superhero in 1962 by Stan Lee, Thor has taken part in some of the most epic stories to ever come to life on the comic book page. While Lee, Jack Kirby, and more helped bring Thor to vivid life and create the many elements that would forever define the Norse god hero, there is one creator whose time on Thor stands above the rest, Walter Simonson. As both writer and artist, Simonson crafted an epic tale for Thor, one that spanned from 1983 to 1987, covering 44 issues and a 4-issue miniseries. In his time as the creative force behind the mighty Thor, Simonson pushed the Asgardian Avenger in exciting new directions. Not only did he create a massive storyline that spanned many minor arcs and encapsulated a wide variety of tones and genres, but he created new wrinkles in the Thor mythos which have heavily informed the decades of comic book stories that have followed. In the years since, writers and artists have followed in Simonson's steps, but few have been able to reach the dizzying heights in which he sent the God of Thunder during his run. From the cosmic to the apocalyptic to the comedic, Simonson's Thor ran the gamut of what could be done with a comic book hero. Together, they formed one colossal, incredibly
doing new things
worthy of the character's mythological origins.
Certainly apparent
Through the
here.
use of smaller story arcs that push forward many different continuing narrative threads, Simonson created a vast arc that works in smaller pieces while being even greater when taken as a whole. As the Asgardian hero takes part in one adventure, Simonson would often slowly lay the groundwork for events that wouldn't occur for potentially dozens of issues. In doing so, the writer could tackle
very strategic
stories that increased in both scope and absurdity,
which makes sense,
while still keeping readers invested and interested. Simonson cites Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's premier run on Thor as the greatest influence upon his run, as well as the works of Scrooge McDuck cartoonist Carl Barks. Perhaps the most powerful lesson I learned from those comics was that if you kept a straight face, you could do anything, said Simonson. The wildest stories were possible if you invited the readers to come along on the journey without breaking faith with them. No nudges in the ribs or sly winks to let them know we were all in on the joke, that we were all too hip for our own good. The essence of a good story is to bind the reader with a spell broken only at the story's conclusion, and perhaps not even that. From the very start in Thor number 337, Simonson decided to shake things up in a major way.
That is quite cool.
Ever since his beginnings in Marvel Comics, Thor shared a body with Donald Blake, a meek and mild human alter ego who would transform into Thor when he struck his wooden cane on the ground, changing the cane into the mystical hammer Mjolnir at the same time. Within his first arc,
Which is
Thor
very
encounters the strange
E-Man
alien
sort
Beta
of thing.
Ray Bill, who bests the hero in combat and is shockingly proven to be worthy of lifting the enchanted hammer, a feat never done in comics before this point. Through their struggle, Bill is given his own hammer, and the Donald Blake persona is removed from Thor, making him into the God of Thunder 24/7. It was a smart move. Simonson's coming stories had no time for small human drama. This was to be an epic tale from start to finish.
Makes
The
sense.
addition of Beta Ray Bill, who would return multiple times throughout the author's run on the series, also allowed for Thor to have cosmic adventures that blended both high fantasy and science fiction. While Thor being pulled through the cosmos by his trusty mystical goats Tooth Gnasher and Tooth Grinder may be a ridiculous image in and of itself,
So he
the
brought
strength
it back.
of Simonson's storytelling capabilities means that readers can accept
He
this as the actual
reintegrated
part of
mythology into it. Amazing.
each issue strikes a wonderful balance between the current main plot and the many seeds being laid for future developments. Enemies old, new, and transformed all target Thor at one point or
Wow.
another, causing devastating setbacks for the Avenger and threatening the future of Asgard and even the entire universe. Like the stories, Thor himself is an embodiment of mythic heroism here. While the Norse god hero may lack the pathos of someone like Batman or the relatability of a character like Spider-Man, Simonson gives his lead character plenty of charm, wit, and charisma. This is a hero who can battle universe-threatening demons one minute and risk everything to save the lives of a single family the next. Simonson makes Thor equally invested in all sorts of needs. He also really puts the character through the ringer, testing him mentally, physically, and spiritually from the very start. That means the reader cares about Thor from the beginning and can care about the wide variety of stories that are told over the course of more than 40 issues. But where would a classic Thor story be without his devilish brother Loki? The god of mischief plays a vital role throughout these many issues. While his machinations create many of the story's most dire situations, he's not always the cackling mastermind. In fact, when faced with the universe-shattering threat of the fire demon Surtur, Loki even joins forces with Thor and Odin, the two people he despises the most. These developments make him into a far more dynamic and interesting character than he would be as a straight villain. Outside of Thor and Loki, Simonson provides satisfying story arcs for multiple side characters who play various roles throughout his epic run. These include Asgardian warrior Sif, who is looking for new purpose in her life, the villain Scourge,
I guess Loki
who
could
finds
be
his loyalties and beliefs tested when all hope seems lost, Balder, who is traumatized after returning from the dead and even given his own miniseries by Simonson, and Underworld Queen Hela, who becomes the biggest threat to Thor as the series progresses. By pitting the Thunder God against numerous classic and new foes, these dozens of issues feature many of the moments that have become synonymous with Thor. Some are stunning, some are tragic, and others are quite outlandish, but they all find the God of Thunder in fine form.
Interesting.
The birth of Beta Ray Bill introduces readers to an alien character who may look like a villain at first glance, but is quickly proven to be a true hero with a good heart. His nobility and heroic nature stand in stark
There's a
contrast
good
to his
weaving of
ugly form.
extrovert and introvert
Simonson
intuition
set
here.
out to create a hero who proved that looks did not need to coincide with heart. As the encapsulation of the writer's blend of sci-fi and fantasy, Bill stands as one of the most memorable creations from this run on the mighty Thor. In Ragnarok and Roll, a gigantic fire demon from the realm of Muspelheim, Surtur, who had been previously
I
featured in
wonder
Thor's
if
ongoing stories,
could it
is
be
given his most
Elohim,
defining
perhaps?
tale. Armed with the magical blade
I'm not
Twilight,
sure.
walked by a vast array
I'm
of
not
demons,
sure yet.
Surtur seeks to destroy Asgard.
Elohim
and
could make
Midgard
sense
in
of
one
the
fell
Star
swoop.
Slammers
The team of Odin,
idea.
and Loki stand in his way of universal annihilation. The massive scope and sacrifice that come with this story set in motion everything that follows. During the escape from Hell, Thor and a company of Asgardian soldiers venture into the realm of the dead to rescue a legion of souls who have been captured by Hela, but they're surrounded by an evil army and must battle their way both in and out. It all culminates with a noble sacrifice at the Bridge of Galabru, one of the series' most defining moments. But not everyone escapes unharmed. Thor is viciously slashed across the face by Hela, causing him to cover his disgusting wounds with a mask, and eventually a beard, leading to a new look for the once clean-shaven Avenger. It's a small change in appearance, but one that reflects the writer's willingness to alter his hero. In
Yes.
Frog of Thunder, Loki
Finally
plays a
managed to get
strange
that
trick
beard
Thor,
on him.
turning him into a powerless frog. The Thunder God retains his intelligence and joins forces with the frogs of New York City's Central Park to defeat an army of rats. But when Thor is able to lift Mjolnir, He's turned into a giant, all-powerful frog instead of his old self. It may be strange.
It's ridiculous.
This fairy tale take on Thor is easily one of his most unique and all-around fun stories.
Amazing.
There are plenty more amazing pieces
Amazing.
in this massive story. Reading them as one whole tale easily makes Simonson's run on Thor into one of comic history's most satisfying arcs. Being that Thor is simultaneously a superhero, mythic god, and interdimensional traveler, the hero can fit in well with many different types of stories. Simonson deftly uses this throughout his run, mixing all three elements into something that fits into these categories while also being its own thing. As Thor and his allies fight foes across the 9 realms, brilliant and dazzling worlds spring to life, with characters spouting language that would feel just as home in an ancient play. This is truly epic stuff, even if the very wordy nature of Simonson's scripts feels far different from today's leaner and faster comic books. Comic book art during the 1980s was a very mixed bag. While some of the medium's greatest artists rose to prominence in the decade, there was also a large share of art that started out decently and has since aged poorly. Thankfully, Simonson's work on Thor has stayed looking great. The way that energy streams out of characters and explodes across the page makes gigantic battles feel even more powerful. While Sal Buscema would take over
The
as
idea
the
of
main
making
series
quite
artist during the
powerful
second half of
dynamic
Simonson's
art also
run, the creative force of the writer
could support LIE, there being some extra sensation in there.
Needed Buscema to help carry the increasingly heavy load of creating the comic. Simonson would return to create the layouts for climactic issue number 380. While the Mighty Thor's grand tale is filled with huge moments, massive fights, and spectacular imagery, its finale dwarfs them all. The plans against Thor concocted by both Loki and Hela have resulted in the World Serpent being unleashed. This enormous dragon is not only powerful enough to swallow the earth, but is destined to kill Thor in combat, as he is destroyed in turn by the god of thunder. However, Thor has been cursed by Hela for his actions against her. His body has become brittle, causing bones to break under blows that he would normally withstand easily and without the ability to be healed. Even worse, Thor has been cursed with the inability to die. It's a devious plot by Hela to turn Thor into a wreck, suffering incalculable pain for all eternity. Now, faced with the enormous World Serpent, Thor fights his greatest enemy across the earth, which has been frozen in time for their epic encounter. While the god of thunder has equipped himself with armor to prevent further injury, the serpent is far too powerful for its defenses. Playing out in full-page spreads, Thor uses his wits and Mjolnir to frustrate his enemy, but Thor sacrifices everything in one supersonic mid-air attack, obliterating the World Serpent while also completely destroying his own body. It's a shocking but necessary culmination for Thor, who Simonson showed to be consistently self-sacrificing and noble. But this isn't the end for the god of thunder. Through ingenuity and wit that may surprise casual Thor fans, the hero uses his intelligence to outsmart the many enemies stacked against him. It's appropriate that the issue featuring this turnabout is called Ye Olde Shell Game, since it sees Thor playing tricks on the typical tricksters. Appropriately, it all boils down to a scene where Loki gets some well-deserved comeuppance. Because Simonson so deftly balanced character with narrative, the stakes of his run on Thor feel like they have simultaneously been a blockbuster journey and a deconstruction of the god of thunder himself. With so many iconic moments and unforgettable stories, it's no wonder that Simonson's time on The Mighty Thor has continued to influence both decades of comics that came after and the films centered on the character. Among the pantheon of great Thor stories, it's Simonson's that will remain the timeless epic for...
Right, what else can we see here? Oh, interview them both. Okay. Let's see this.
So welcome to
Thanks,
our viewer,
Claudia.
welcome to
I will do so.
panel brought to you
Thank
by
you.
the Students of Shield, the comic book club affiliated with Penn State University. I am your moderator, Mikey, and joining us today is two legends that I'm surprised we even got here in the first place, because it's just their career and everything about them is so recognizable and just legendary, to be honest. One is a writer and editor, one is a writer and artist. The dynamic duo themselves, Louise and Walt Simonson. How are you guys doing today?
Hi, we've been great.
We're good. So right, guys, we're good. Yeah, we're dealing with the whole pandemic and classes.
Okay, I think I see anything else on Walt Simonson.
Tricky situation, but we're going through it very well.
Has the campus been doing pretty well as far as COVID is concerned, generally?
Yeah, so far so good. I mean, we're mostly a mix of online and in person. Mostly online. Now we just most of the time we're either in our apartments or in our dorms, just doing our classes, or we're in of some buildings, not all of them. But
Pause for a second. Just want to check this out. Overwordy dialogue, heavy text laden, extensive thought bubbles. Yeah, he's a nerd. They're talking to themselves. One finds his style tedious, some of it leaves less room for the article to tell the story because he's more intellectually driven. Controversial recolorings. Many purists and retro comic fans like modern colors, but the flat colors of 1980s original pressings. His trademark high fantasy can occasionally dip into campy sitcom style humor. As in the form as a frog. Spore and X Factor runs a legendary data tenure on books like Fantastic Four, was frequently criticized for failing to capture the same magic. Hmm. Might take a look at that. Hmm. While it may be overstating the case to describe superhero comics as modern myths in a post-religious age, there's some sorts have taken on a near mythic quality, as the stories you have to read. For Fantasy Week, I wanted to dive into a run that's not only held up as one of the defining Marvel stories of the 80s, but also the high point of a particular character's history. Simonson's legendary 4-year run on Thor. Let's see. Some of the space skills, as immediately evident, also owes a huge depth to Jack Kirby. Like his artistic idol, he knows how to make the utterly alien completely comprehensible, incomprehensible at the same time. Same sort of paranoid energy that Kirby brought to stories like the Galactus trilogy. So he leaned heavily on cosmic imagery, yeah, and not just cosmic imagery either, but creation imagery. Repeating repeatedly his first several issues, the forging of the sword, Twilight being how to with ancient fire demon Surtur, draws upon on both Kirby and the long artistic history of the fires of creation that stretched back centuries. For it's in this issue we get to see the origin of Beta Ray Bill, a cyborg space horse managed to lift force, hammer and gain his power, something no one's ever done in Marvel history. The drastic shift he marks his own era as a distinct shift from his work with Vine. Everyone else had a lot of fun cosmic stuff, ending with big Avengers team-ups pretty great. But solo work is, to use a horribly overused word, epic. It's grand space opera like the Fantastic Four before, but also human and intimate like Spider-Man. It's no small feat when you realize that while most Marvel books at the time only had to show one corner or so of NYC, Thor had to portray an entire cosmos all on its own. He was also charmed by his sense of humor. The fish out of water stuff that comes with Asgard's world had been temporarily stranded on Earth. Just Volstagg discovering the wonders of Teflon inside of Macy's. Was some fun lampshading. Early on, he wisely ditches what had been a plot device in conventional Thor since the very beginning, his mortal identity of Don Blake, reverts to separated from Mjolnir for 60 seconds. Instead, Thor gets up in a new civilian identity by Nick Fury, along with a construction job at a site remember Nick's cousin. Assuming new identity was Sigurd Jarlson, he bumped into John Burns' Clark Kent. What? There's also a great bit where one of his mortal allies hears someone talk about Thor and Sigurd being one and the same. He's perplexed. Edward's fooled by Thor's disguise. He thinks it's how secret identities work. And here you thought Grant Morrison invented meta commentary in the superhero stories. He didn't draw every issue he wrote, with lastly seen him handing penciling over to Sal Buscema. The transition so seamless and two styles gel so perfectly together you'd be hard-pressed to really notice. Biscuit was the Bold of the Brave 4-issue miniseries. The Irritation is one of the definitive Marvel runs, and the definitive run of 4 is intact. Okay, great. Was there anything remotely critical? No, not really. It's just compliments, really. Fair enough. I mean, he does seem really capable, of course, but you know. What else can we? Let's look at this. Go on.
That's the situation with us. So my first, I just want to do like a quick icebreaker question. So how have you guys been dealing with the pandemic? Have you been like catching up with TV shows? Have you been writing new material, working on new stuff? Like how have you guys been doing on for it?
Oh, I go out and knock off convenience stores once in a while, just kind of relief for something. But you know, I mean, the weird thing is, since we're freelancers, our lives haven't changed in a lot of ways. I mean, the way years as students have changed, I would think enormously. Not having direct classes, kind of being able to hang out with all your friends in quite the same way. Although I do see pictures of footage of college campuses with giant frat parties going on occasionally, with lots of people without masks on them. I'm sure nobody here in this room is like that.
No, we take this very serious.
Good. It is very serious. Probably more for me than for you guys, but
yeah, of course.
Nevertheless, but we work at home anyway. We're used to being in the same house all the time. So excuse me. So basically, we keep working. I mean, I will say one of the things about maybe just because of the COVID, this tension. I'm not quite sure what it is. I seem to be working a lot slower than I did. I mean, I'd like to play the old guy card here and say, oh, it's my age. But really, I think it's probably as much to do with just, there aren't as many deadlines. The company's closed down for 2 or 3 months. Now they're kind of open back up, at least to some extent. I know some people have lost their jobs in comics. I don't think those are coming back. I'm not quite sure. I don't know what the comic shop situation is going to be when this is all done. Most of the shops don't operate, as far as I can tell, on a large extra budget. So when you've got a shoestring budget and no customers, it's very difficult. Our local shop here, where we live, north of New York City, has opened up again, but it's I forget what the phrase is now, but it's like restaurants. It's like touch and go. You call them up, they bring your comics out, you pick them up on the sidewalk and get going. So that is happening, and the local comic shop is functioning in that way. But how the industry is going to be once the dust really settles, hard to say.
Yeah. So you guys are in New York City?
North of New York. North of New York.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
We were in New York for a number of years, and then blew it off for the country, sort of the country. Hey, Sugar, I was going to say, if you could up your light just a little bit.
Just turned on the overhead light.
Oh, well.
As bright as it gets, unless you want to do this. Let me see what I can do. Do that.
Well,
I mean,
maybe
it was fine before. You didn't have to.
maybe not. Never mind.
Yeah, it was fine before.
I'm married to a vampire, but don't tell me.
No, it's not that bad.
No, actually, not bad.
Right.
Yep. Yeah, no, we can see you fine. We can see you fine, Louise. It's no problem.
Turn on the other light, I have to say.
But Louise, how have you been doing with the pandemic and quarantine?
I've been doing fine. I've been maybe working more slowly. Yeah. I think I call it, because I call it COVID brain.
Okay.
Where you're so, I don't know. It's a little
Yeah, I think he's more extroverted.
Yeah.
Wow. Meet your friends at restaurants. And I mean, we, as Walter said, we do work at home. We've been working at home, since the dawn of time. But it's unrelentingly at home. It's like, oh boy, I get to go to the grocery store and
Someone's happy to set up his own things, really to taking charge of projects a lot more and liking to be able to do things his way.
so
Huge amount of Norse mythology knowledge. Happy though to work with others as well.
Flows a little bit slower Okay.
Yeah, and when
I'm-
you,
Right.
I mean, when we have had friends over for, outside social distance dinners, but then after that, I always like to wait about, 10 or 12 days between engagements so that if anybody's gonna get COVID, we'll know, and then we won't pass it on to other people, so.
Okay, that's good.
I mean, that's our lives. It sounds very dull, and you guys have much more interesting lives.
Very,
But we're
very
we're
diligent in those years.
Not fine.
Well, well, I'm glad you guys are doing. At least you're getting your workflow done. I mean, it slowed down, of course, but I mean, as long as you guys are, keeping yourself safe, comfortable, that's all that matters. So,
But one thing I did do is I took on some commission work.
nice.
And I've still got 3 or 4 of those left to do. I never do commissions. I virtually never. I will do drawings for charity auctions, things of that sort. But most of the time, I really prefer telling stories and drawing to
Yeah.
tell stories rather than doing a great big shot of whoever it might be. I did want a block recently from the Legion.
Doesn't seem to do what he doesn't find interesting.
It's fun. I drew block. I've drawn him once or twice. So I've done a Darth Vader, I've done a couple Thors, I've done a Beta Ray Bill. I mean, some of the ones you'd expect, and then some of them like Block that you wouldn't really expect. I have one coming up. I have to draw Bizarro, which is kind of interesting. I don't think I've drawn Bizarro professionally up to now, at all. I've got a big Thor commission I have to do, and some other stuff like that. So I do have things to do. Honestly, if I'd sat down and worked at it the way I used to work back in April, these would all be done in memories like a long time ago by now, but I still have several. I nap more than I used to. I just, I get up and go, I'm tired. Let's lie down for a while. So I don't know if that's part of the COVID stuff or not, but we are getting work done. I'm working. I've been doing a comic called Ragnarok for a while now.
Yeah.
Yes, he's a very
Slowly.
busy
I was doing it
person
slowly
typically.
before the pandemic.
His
And
fans are
I
winding
am
down a bit.
plotting out the 4th arc right now. So I've done a lot of work on that. I came up with an ending yesterday that I was pretty pleased about. After some work, I got to polish it some, but I'm getting that nailed, so I'll have that ready to go. In a couple of weeks, I hope I'll have that all squared away.
That's good. So my second question for you both, because of course you guys have worked on a majority of everything you can work on in comics when it comes to characters with like the big two, like Louise has done New Mutants, like she created Power Pack, did Cable, all the other cool stuff. Walt did Thor, Fantastic Four, some Batman. So I want to know out of all the stuff you guys have done, which has been your either like your favorite character or title to work on throughout your career. One of you can go.
Okay, my favorite is whatever I'm working on right now.
Got it.
That's the most fun I'm having right now.
Right.
Probably the one that's maybe the most meaningful for me is Power Pack, because June and I made it up. So it's, that makes a difference. Also, it was the first comic I wrote. So I think that one, it was actually kind of, I guess, my favorite in a way. I'm working on a Power Pack miniseries now that'll be out, this coming summer. Supposedly,
Nice.
if anything comes out in the summer, we'll see.
Oh yeah, of course.
If the check clears, it's my favorite comic.
Of course.
Really, probably. And I've done several titles that I've been very happy to do and happy with the work. My sentimental favorite probably remains a strip called Manhunter that I drew I didn't write it. I'm sorry. I drew in 1973 and 74. It was for DC. It was a backup feature in Detective Comics. It was a bi-monthly book, so it ran for a year. There were 7 chapters. The late Archie Goodwin, who was the editor of the book,
Why is it favorite?
was really the creator of the character. I was the designer of the character, and we worked together. I began that work 6 months into my career, which means I was 26 probably when I started drawing that stuff. It ran for a year. We had a definitive climax that wrapped up the story. Archie was leaving the company to go work elsewhere, and the new editor on the book, Julie Schwartz, was not going to run the strip. And honestly, I wasn't going to do it without Archie, even if the option had been there, which it wasn't. So we decided that we would close everything down with. We had been planning on doing a Batman crossover, so we just made the Batman story part of the Manhunter story, did a 20-page climax to the whole thing. And before I began that strip, I was 6 months into my career. I was a guy that, I knew my contemporaries in comics by then. Howard Chaykin. The day I came to New York, I met, looking for work, Howard Chaykin, Bernie Wrights, and Michael Kaluta, and probably Dan Green were all sitting around the table at DC in the coffee. So I knew all the young guys. I met all the young guys in the 6 months, those 6 months. But a lot of the editors didn't know who I was. And when I finished that strip about a year later, a little over a year later, it had done really well professionally. It wasn't the kind of fandom that we would have now. That what we're doing right now would never have happened. You never had trouble scraping together 9 people to talk about comics. But the strip had won several awards. And so when I finished that strip, every editor knew who I was. And I really never had to go out looking for work again. I was offered jobs after that in a way I had not been before. So, and I still have plenty of fans who think the work I did when I was 26 was the best work I ever did. So, so it's nice. It's, it's a sentimental favorite. And in some ways,
How was that
I worked with
sentimental,
Archie
really?
more closely than I worked with anybody else I've worked with, any other writers. I can't tell you why. It's a little like lightning in a bottle, but there was something about our working together that both of us thoroughly enjoyed. And I think you see that in the work. And also, I see, you need to go back and look at the material. In fact, here's a quick plug. It's being reprinted by DC, I think on hardcover sometime next year.
Take some introverted ethics there.
It's been out, but hasn't been out for a number of decades or so. And when I did that work, I can see in the beginning chapter the development of me as an artist, as a draftsman, over the course of those 7 chapters. The last chapter is much better drawn than the first chapter. And so, for those reasons, that's a sentimental thing.
A lot of tracking his own development and where he was there, where he was there. He charts his own history very well.
One. Anyone you want.
You just asked the third one, so I guess I'll go back to the second one then.
Go for it.
He also, I say he doesn't take it too seriously. He also, it's funny, he speaks in a way where he has humor. He opens with humor. And then he gives an answer where he is taking himself pretty seriously, actually. Interesting, that answer he gave about the most sentimental piece of work for him. He didn't give any sort of feelings so much as, after I did this, people knew who I was. It really advanced his career. It was a turning point in his career. So that wasn't really sentimental. He later talked about how working with Archie, we had a connection I had with no one else. So there is some, but it's interesting how he said that the first thing was basically he was known to everyone as a result of this. That's interesting.
Biggest influences on your writing or art?
You want to go first?
Yeah, I'll try and keep it shorter than usual.
Because he gives long responses.
Bottom ones are all the ones you'd expect.
He's wordy.
Steve Ditko. Yeah, maybe Gene Colan. The guys whose work I love, but wasn't really influenced by. But the fact that we're doing work was the stuff I was reading. I read comics as a kid in the 50s. I read every kind of comic that I could afford to buy, which means I read comics that were westerns. I read comics, TV adaptations, movie adaptations. The first one of the early ones I read was Helen of Troy, which was an adaptation of a movie directed by Robert Wise in the mid-50s. It was a British-Italian co-production, I think. And I read the comic, beautifully drawn, most likely by John Buscema, almost certainly not inked by John. It's possible his brother inked it. It was gorgeous. I loved it. I still love it. However, at the end of it, Helen and Paris got away. I don't know if you've read the Iliad, or the stuff after the Aeneid that ends it. Helen and Paris do not get away. There's a different ending from Homer and from Virgil. And I went to see the movie.
Loves alternative history. Like, what if they didn't do this? What happens as a result of it?
Dies, and Helen goes back to Greece, and I was flabbergasted. I have never gotten over the fact that Paris and Helen didn't get away together, a romantic getaway somewhere in the Eastern Mediterranean. So I read comics. I loved them. I read comics in college in the 60s when Marvel was doing great work, when Jack was doing some of his most brilliant work, Ditko, Gil Kane, Gene Colan, all those guys. And so I eventually went to art school. While I was in art school, I developed a real interest in doing comics, physically writing my own stories. I wasn't interested in the writing, but I wrote my own story so I could draw it. Ultimately, that became my portfolio for going to New York. I decided to go to New York and try and get into comics.
And you see the very deliberate, very career-oriented approach that he's taken here.
The day I showed up at DC, couldn't do this now. I was able to go into DC. I had an appointment, but I went into DC. I showed him to an editor. He said, "Well, this is nice, but what else can you do?" And I thought, "Oh no, I'll never get into comics. I'll be working at McDonald's for the rest of my life." And I walked out of the coffee room.
A catastrophe
That's
there.
when I said Howard Chaykin, Bernie Wrights, and Michael Kaluta, probably Dan Green, were all sitting around a little table in the coffee room. We ended up talking. I'd met Howard briefly about a year earlier. Showed him my stuff. Michael Kaluta took my portfolio. He showed it to this old guy behind me. And by old, I mean the guy about half my age now. But he seemed old to me then. His name was Jack Adler. He was the second in command in production at DC. I learned only after Jack was gone, he colored the very first Superman new color. And he did color. He overlorded that stuff at DC as well as other things. And Michael showed him my work. He liked it. He said, "Let me go show this to Carmine." Carmine Infantino was the editor-in-chief publisher at DC at the time. I knew Carmine's work. He'd been an artist, a working artist for many years.
Good tracking of what happened in his life.
Jack took the portfolio, and I sat there talking nervously to Bernie and Howard and Michael and Dan. And then Jack came back into the room at the dead run, and he said, "Carmine wants to see it. Let's go." Like it was one sentence or one word. So I found myself in Carmine's office. We talked about comics. I don't remember anything about that conversation. Maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10. The only thing I remember is he did ask me if I liked Bernie Krigstein's work and was influenced by it. And at that time, I did not know Krigstein's work. If you guys don't know Krigstein's work, you should go seek it out. In particular, a story called Master Race, which was a story for EC Comics, which is an absolutely spectacular piece of storytelling. He had some other ones as well. But after we were done, Carmine liked my work. He called in 3 of his editors, including one of the ones who would turn me out of his office or sent me away gently, but sent me away saying, "What else can you do?" And he made them all give me a short story. Back then, there were short stories in comics. So I drew 2 of the 3 stories. And by the time I had done that, one of the editors had begun to feed me we're talking about 3-page stories, a couple of pinups, a 5-page story, really short little things used to be in the back of comics. And I was able to hang on and make a living, really, at that stuff until I was offered Manhunter, which is my first regular gig. And then after that, I didn't really have to look back. Sorry, honey, that was as short as I could make it.
That was short.
I know, that was the short.
Slightest.
Did good. Oh, so I'm supposed to.
That's you.
Sorry.
That's fine.
What can I say? Okay. What I read books when I was a child. I didn't read comics all that much. I got a tiny little allowance. 5 cents got raised to 10 cents. And eventually when I was in high school.
You can look at Lewis Simpson another time.
This is a long time ago, but that really wasn't very much. Horrible little drawings. And I showed him Shooter, gave him my proposal, and he loved it. And he said, "Okay, you've got a series. The first issue is double size, and it's due in 2 months." And that was it. And then I started doing, becoming more interested in writing and less interested in editing. So that was a long story, Walter.
I'm proud of you, honey.
It was a great story.
I think you thought that if you sold Power Pack, you were going to quit your job as an editor and go freelance as a writer. And also,
No. If I sold my job as Power Pack, I was going to buy a computer.
Yeah, well, I knew that. I was just saying, we bought it. This was when word processors were just coming in. We had a brand called K-Pro, which are great computers for word processing.
Right.
The modern ones aren't really much better. but they were great little computers for word processing.
Very,
And,
again, very factual.
Weezy Soldier Story.
Very factual.
I think the K-Pro was about 2 feet across.
Quite dry as well, I'd say.
And it was, I think, around $1,800, and a dot matrix printer was about $800 or $900. So it took us not quite $3,000 to get our first computer squared away and hooked up, and then Easy was off to the races.
Yes. And then I got hired to do more writing by other people, and then I just wandered off and quit editing and started writing. The end.
Yeah.
She's a lot more down to earth than he is.
Those amazing origin stories. Who cares?
I will say,
as long as they're
one thing
eventful.
Weezy didn't say, I don't think. I don't know if you guys know Warren Publishing. That's the company she worked for originally.
Look at his background.
And they did horror.
No real attention to creating a sort of nice, positive back. No sort of, marbly trophies. It's very sort of dry, plenty of material filed away there behind him. There's nothing's on display.
I'm sorry.
It's just a room.
Like the fact you have your nickname being Weezy, I think is the coolest thing ever.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So Weezy, my first question for you specifically is: so when it comes to like legendary like women working in the comic book industry, like the two people that I've noticed in interviews whose names came up are yours and like Jeanette Kahn, who was an editor and then eventually president of DC Comics at the time. So I wanted to ask you, did you face any like challenges as a female writer coming up in the industry? Because you tackled a lot of like really big and important books like throughout your career in like the 70s through the 90s. So that's my
it's funny. What the only thing I guess would be kind of a challenge, sort of, was that I know that when I came to Marvel, I was handed the X-Men.
Mhm.
I think people considered Chris Claremont to be difficult to work with. I thought it was a pleasure. I loved working with Chris, but there were people who thought he was difficult. So I was handed the Chris books, which was X-Men and Bandit. And then I was handed a batch of licensed properties, which were Battlestar Galactica, Star Wars, Indiana Jones at some point, the Conan books, Micronauts, probably some others that I've forgotten.
Let's get this.
Some of the stuff that's gone on and some things that have happened, which are appalling to us, and yet she just never ran into that. I think it's done.
No, I was not in that gas.
yeah, it looks like. I mean, which is good.
I guess. I did have Jim Shooter tell me that I treated him like a kindergartner.
Oh, did he act like a kindergartner?
Yes. Just it was one time. I don't know what I don't even know what it was. We got into some kind of
You were calling him out on what it was, so I mean,
like that. Yeah, I did. I mean, honestly, and I hadn't even whatever I did to make it feel that way. I hadn't meant to, because I really respected him. I thought he had a lot of really good ideas. Sometimes he went a little overboard in expressing them, but I thought he was actually a really good editor-in-chief. For most of the time he was there. So I had not meant to insult him in such a way, but it kind of cracks you up that I said such a thing. Thing to say. Whatever it was I said to him that made him say that. Should have been ashamed of myself, but he was my boss.
got it. Well, so my next question, Weezy, while doing my research,
Okay.
you killed Superman.
I did. Not alone.
Yeah, not alone, of course.
Superman by yourself.
Right, this is
Yeah,
a bit
exactly. So
more on Louise than it's good to see their dynamic. At least. Let's see this one. This is very recent. Let's see if I find something from younger as well.
I had a studio in New York for a while. in the late 70s and very early 80s. I was there the entire time. When we started, we had me, Howard Chaykin,
Nothing is on
Mal
display.
Mary,
But you can see there's
and
lots
Jim
of
Starlin.
artwork, Father. He keeps that for himself. It's not
Frank
on
was
display.
Daredevil. And at the time, we had Howard was doing American Flag, I was doing Thor, Frank was doing Daredevil.
That's so cool.
Wow.
This is.
Okay, you can skip this part.
Down.
Sean is trying to come up with a brand new, as kindly and like as much courtesy as possible. And I know you're a freelancer. How do we get you out of here so that you can go about your day instead of hanging out with like dum-dums, for an hour and a half?
I'm happy
And
to.
thankfully-
I have done longer podcasts than an hour and a half, so
Okay.
I am very chatty. You'll probably have a chance to ask about 4 questions.
Okay.
An hour and a half
That
will go.
makes it easy.
Long answers, as he's very aware of.
Talking for us.
People don't have to hear us. That's good.
There's just a lot in that
We
brain.
do the thing where we break down Walt's career because I feel like that's going to get tedious super fast.
That will get to you super
I
fast.
feel like that's been done.
That's been done.
A
a
lot.
bunch of times.
Thank you.
All I can say is, good luck asking questions I haven't been asked before.
A question that a question that I asked, and I know maybe people have asked this before, but like, I don't know if you've tuned into episodes that we've done before. Walt, have you done that?
I
you
have
seen
not.
any?
I don't generally watch video casts or podcast. Listen to podcasts.
Yeah.
This would not be true in your case. I don't listen to podcasts mostly. I mean, I've tried a few
Yeah.
in comics, and and sometimes when they're about me, I'll especially be interested. But usually, I'm not 3 minutes in before I start hearing factual errors, and they're usually on things that are so simple to research. But I just think, really, you guys haven't spent any more time than that figuring this out before you broadcast it. So I want to start getting out.
Quite serious about factual accuracy. Gets dismissive quite quickly.
Like 2
A bit irascible around that potentially.
Here.
I'm going to give you some rope.
I'd like to start with. I have a good thing to start with. We asked Klaus this question, and I'd love to hear Walter's perspective on this. For our generation, me, Eric, and Mateo, you're younger.
I'm leaning LIE for him. I'm leaning. I don't think we've actually managed to get an LIE comic book artist yet. Maybe this is the one.
Just exploding. And that was where the generation of you guys coming in, like you and Chaykin and Klaus and Frank Miller.
It's sort of a what's his name?
Something going on in the industry, in the business at that time that attracted you and allowed you guys to push the medium and the boundaries of what was
like a
being done.
Billy Corgan-esque style to him.
Guys, it kind of
I
quieted
don't know.
down a bit. So what was that, Walter? What?
Well, partly it was being young, because you don't know the rules when you're young. You just do stuff. Now I know too many rules. They're hard to get around sometimes. Part of it was that most of the guys you mentioned who are my age, or a little younger. I'm fractionally older than most of the guys in my generation because I went to college a couple times. But we all were guys who read comics mostly in the 60s, which was a pretty exciting time, especially the birth of Marvel Comics and Marvel up to about 67 or 68. After that, they began kind of repeating stories somewhat. But that burst of energy from Jack and Steve Ditko and Stan, Roy, all those guys were doing stuff. I can't speak for anybody else. That's the stuff I was reading. I wasn't reading a lot of DC, but the late 60s, they began doing a lot of strange stuff. Angel and the Ape, Enemy Ace. There's a bunch of Hawk and the Dove. And that was none of those lasted very long, but they were very exciting. It was neat to see. And Steranko, watching Steranko stuff on S.H.I.E.L.D. So it went watching him, improve by leaps and bounds with every issue virtually. So all that stuff was exciting. In my own case, I decided that I wanted to be a part of comics. I wanted to do that kind of stuff. I was in art school in the end of the 60s, early 70s at the Rhode Island School of Design. And I did a comic book as my degree project. I did a version of Star Slammers. It was a 2-year project from junior year through senior year. As far as I know, I'm the first guy to do a comic book as a degree project at RISD. Since then, I mean, within a year or two, somebody else was doing it. So that I don't know. Since then, I have no idea. But I got a lot of feedback from my professors. They didn't know comics, but they knew all the stuff like, drawing, costume design, perspective, set design, basically. A lot of stuff like that. They were very helpful. And they were very encouraging about it. I mean, I've had people say, yeah, my professor wasn't really, or in school, weren't too encouraged. Mine were really encouraging. I was very serious about it. That probably
Yeah, he
helped.
seems very serious about things.
My portfolio when I came to New York. And I did a lot of experimental things. I was trying, I had one shot, it was a 7 or 8 chapter story over the 2 years. I forget how long. And in the very first chapters are not bad fan work. They're pretty good fan work. The last chapters are marginally professional. And that's because they improved over that time. And in my first...
So he often talked about how he improved over time doing this.
5 or 6 page chapter. They weren't long, but it took me a while to do back then. I was writing it, penciling it, lettering it, and inking it. It was all in black and white. Wow. And I have a shot I still remember, which was some guys at a conference table, and I had a complete vertical shot, like you were just over top of these guys, looking straight down. I'm not sure it would ever occur to me now to use exactly that shot if I had to show guys at a conference table. For one thing, you can't see their faces. You don't get any reaction out of them. And I would be thinking about that, about the acting. But the shot's pretty cool. So at the time, having no rules, I just did whatever felt right. That's what felt like it would tell the story. And I became pretty decent at telling the story. So by the end of it, somewhere in the course of that, I learned that it was helpful to me to use reference. The really early stuff I did was not referenced. I still remember I've got a shot where a guy is wearing a glove. He slams his hand down on a big button. I'm like just pushing the button where it wouldn't be so dramatic. So it's like wham, hits the button. And I put a glove in my hand and drew my own hand from this angle. I was up over it and drew it. And it really came out well. And I thought, well, that's useful. That's probably be useful to use reference. So I began using reference. So I learned a lot, but I tried lots. So I took a topography course when I was at RISD, and I really liked letter forms. I like letter form designs. I did my own lettering in the early days, so I incorporated all that stuff, whatever I knew, and whether rules I followed or didn't follow. I worked on that to try and make the stuff lively. I loved sound effects. It's a two-dimensional representation of something that isn't even in space, and you can't even draw it. Really, you just get the sound when somebody does something, and suddenly you have a sound in the comic or its equivalent, the graphic version. And I had done some experimental stuff. One of the classes we had, in the typography class, one of the assignments we had was to find a letter and then do variations on it. Same letter, but it was like, put it all in a row. Make the spacing different. Run them in a circle. Run some backwards and forwards. It's like... I wouldn't compare myself to Bach, but in Bach's music, there are in his polyphonic polyphony sounds, he would run a theme, and then he would actually invert the theme, and he was so good he could run that with the theme not inverted and change stuff backwards and forwards. And that was kind of the idea with the letter. I take a letter form, and I used the F from the brand name Fendi. I know Fendi is some fashion thing. Yeah. I don't remember what the hell it is anymore, but I don't women's fashions, I'm not even sure. And it was just a really simple, almost like Helvetica, just a really simple F form, no serifs. And I did a whole bunch of experiments with, right side up, upside down, backwards, fitting everything together as much as I could. And it gave me a certain amount of experimental freedom. I think when I came into comics, I was kind of used to doing a bunch of different stuff. And I think all of us were excited, all the guys I knew. Like
experience, learning from practicing different things.
Michael Kaluta. Those are the guys I met the very first day I came to New York. I walked into the coffee room at DC Comics. Those 3 guys, and probably Alan Weiss, were the 4 guys sitting at a table I introduced myself to, and things went from there. So all of us, I can't speak for all, but most of us, many of us, Howard and I had a lot of discussions about it. We all thought comics was dying. It was a dying business. Oh yeah, it was
So
it was
it's a
all
constant theme in the history of comics.
it was, it was not direct market, it was all newsstand sales. And the newsstand
Starting from a
sales,
sort
you
of
could
pessimistic
imagine,
outlook.
they were going down a little every month. And at that point, they'd produce a bunch of comics, they'd send them out, and there were still returns on comics. And you had comics that were selling like 30%, and the rest of the issues were supposedly being destroyed. I think that, which is really a wasteful way of doing business, but that was the way it was then. So we all thought comics was dying, but we all wanted to do them. And we really wanted to do them with a passion. And we had learned from all these masters that had done the work in the 60s in American comics. I wasn't so familiar with European comics at the time. I didn't discover those for the most part until I was in New York and able to go to conventions where Bud Plant would show up with books from France and books from Italy and books from Spain and stuff I couldn't read, but I could see the drawings. And I discovered Sergio Topi that way. More or less discovered Mobius. I'd seen a little of his earlier work in Pilote magazine. A friend of mine had who had a French background. And so all of that stuff, it was grist for the mill. And it was really explosive. You found stuff you'd never seen before. You could emulate work you had seen, but you were trying to find some way to get at it.
There's a lot of experimentation, but it's very targeted towards certain outcomes that he wants.
Was the amount of energy he could put into every damn drawing he did.
But also in that fluid interplay, a willingness to let other people also contribute ideas in his space, like how he works closely with his wife. He's not precious over that. Getting more precious over the accuracy of things. And potentially quite particular on certain things being done almost perfectionistically.
Doing my own way. And so all that stuff was going on. It was very helpful then. I don't know about now. Now I'm in my house. It's really wonderful. I've got my studio. I'm sitting here at my desk. Right there, I have my printer. Right here, I have my scanner. I don't ever have to get up. Not good for my muscle tone, but really, I've got my cockpit. I'm ready to rock. And I've got a drawing board, which you can't really see behind me. That's my drawing board right here.
Emphasis again on his work, what he's doing. Not on anything for display.
Drawing board from time to time. But I'm able to work here. I scan everything. I send it in. And generally editors like it. I'm generally okay on that. I talk to editors by email. So now, unlike the old days, now I have editors I work with regularly I've never seen, I've never met. I have a bunch of friends, a lot of my friends from my generation.
Doesn't he just see him meet people he works with?
I don't think John Byrne has done a drawing in something like, well, he hasn't drawn new stuff for a couple of years. He's now working on that X project he's doing.
He's quite a bit older, but he's still keeping very busy.
Age of that as well. And so, but it means in the old days, you went into the office. And so I met Joe Kubert and Julie Schwartz and Murray Goldknoff and Archie Goodwin and all these guys. And then eventually over at Marvel, Roy Thomas, Stan Lee, younger editors were coming in. A lot of them were my contemporaries, the Len Weems, the Jerry Conways, the Mark Wolfmans. And I met all the freelancers. Besides Kubert, I did meet Jack Kirby. He'd already gone to the West Coast, but he was back for New York at one point, so got a chance to meet him. There was a bunch of others of that era, many of whom are now well known now, not remembered, but they were the backbone of the industry at the time. The Don Hextall became a good friend. Greg Hildebrandt, who was doing painted stuff. So meeting these guys. And you could see the work. They were bringing their work in back in those days.
And give their own view on Walter Simonson.
In order to get it photographed, edited, corrected, run through production.
Let's see. So it's all about interviews about him and his work. Let's see what else there is. Hmm. Oh yeah, I remember seeing some of this before. Watch a bit more of it.
I'm really delighted by that story. I thought it worked out great for Loki. I thought it was funny for Balder. It was a good character bit for both for Balder and for Loki. And the reason that happened that way, really, is I talked to Chris Claremont in the office. I described the story that you'd heard up to the point where Balder cuts his head off. But what I had originally was that Balder finally clocks Loki, pulls his sword out, and drives it down. But he ends up driving it down right into the floor next to his head, maybe clips his ear. Doesn't really cut his head off. And Chris said, "Oh man, I thought you already cut his head off." And I said, "Wow." For the moments come to my hand.
And what can I say? A man that created so many of.
But before that, there were offices for both companies. And if you worked for either one or the other, you took your work in before the days of scanning and computers. The work, physical work, the actual physical pages had to go to the office to turn into your editor so they could be copied, colored, printed, lettered. They were back and forth to inkers, back and forth to letterers, back and forth to pencilers, and so on. So it gave you a chance to be in the office and see people a lot. So all the people in my generation and the older generations before me are all people that I knew. I wasn't as friendly with some as with others, but I knew them all really well. And it was great. It was, I think, comics was in some ways as much a social affair as it was a professional one. Folks that you worked with were your friends. You hung out together after the hours. You went to movies together, dinner together, all that stuff. Conventions for us kind of recapture a little bit because we get to go out to dinner again with some of our friends we don't see hardly ever anymore. So, given that, one of the things we also would do is we would go into the office and you bump into somebody like Chris, and Chris give you the next 5 years of X-Men continuity if you talked for an hour. But to be perfectly fair, I would then give him the next 5 years of Thor continuity at the same rate. So we were talking once about one of the stories I was going to do. I was doing a story about Balder. For those of you who haven't read it, I put Balder through the ringer just because it was fun. And he got way overweight. He'd done some awful stuff. And eventually Odin asks him for a favor. And Odin wants him, Odin knows that bad stuff's coming. He wants Balder to go and talk to Loki to see if they can enlist Loki's aid. And Loki, of course, is pretty much on his own, doesn't care about anybody else. So Balder goes, makes the trip there. It's not an easy trip. He gets there. He explains to Loki how important this all is. And essentially, after listening to him, Loki blows him off. He blows him off as truly as possible. And finally, Balder loses it. This is by the way, this is a spoiler warning. If you have not read it, I know the comic's 30 some years, 30, almost 40 years old now. So now I don't care. If you haven't read it, I'm sorry, because I am going to tell you what happens. Balder finally freaks out, pulls out his sword, and cuts off Loki's head. And runs out of the building screaming, as it were, and rides off in the desert into self-imposed exile. Loki's body, headless body, is standing there. The head is sitting on the ground. It fell neck down, which is a good thing, so it's just sitting there with the head up. And then after a moment, the body bends over, and it picks up the head, and it reattaches itself. But after all, Loki is a sorcerer. This is his job. So I'm really delighted by that story. I thought it worked out great for Loki. I thought it was funny for Balder. It was a good character bit for both for Balder and for Loki. And the reason that happened that way, really, because I talked to Chris Claremont in the office. I described the story that you'd heard up to the point where Balder cuts his head off. What I had originally was that Balder finally clocks Loki, pulls his sword out, and drives it down. But he ends up driving it down right into the floor next to his head, maybe clips his ear. Doesn't really cut his head off. And Chris said, "Oh man, I thought you already cut his head off." And I said, "Fuck." Probably in those exact words. I'm sorry, are there any kids here? Oh, I'm sorry. But so I just thought, all right, oh, I'm terribly sorry. Oh, he's playing a video game, I'm good. So I rewrote my ending of my story. That's the way the story came out. If we did not have the offices back in the old days and the social
interactions with all of us and talk to each other, editors as well as freelancers in the offices, that story would not have been as good as it was. So I want to thank Chris for giving me the idea. I have occasionally credited him once in a blue moon at conventions, but not very often because I want people to think I'm brilliant, not that Chris is brilliant. So thank you very much, Chris. That was my story.
Thanks, Cal. Walt Simonson, everybody. Another Marvel legend, absolutely. Look at him. Anyway, so all right. No, you're like Bob Hope. Yeah, I'm taping a special down the street. I just want to say hello. Thanks, guys. Walter, I just had this Loki idea.
He's a very articulate person, very factual. I think LIE. I haven't seen much to suggest otherwise. I'm looking for like a hook, line, and sinker on this. I'm struggling to find one. I'm spending a good amount of time already on it. Let me just go back to Wikipedia. Maybe I'll try Wikipedia this time. See what else I can find here. It's about to be seen by girls buying comics while at high school. So geology, or an expert on dinosaurs. So developing an area of expertise, factual expertise, is what seems to be an important driver for him. And that's quite clear. He seems to very much relish factual knowledge. And felt that drawing comics was more feasible as a career than working outdoors in hot weather as a geologist or paleontologist. Despite harboring a love of the rest of his life, he actually made a pragmatic decision to go into comics. That's interesting. Was influenced by Ditko and Kirby, so sort of the SE and NI mix there potentially. He got his degree in geology, then went into art. I do find it interesting when asked about what his favorite piece was, he said the thing which basically made people know who he was. So the introvert ethics is kind of there. He gives lip service to it, but I'm not getting much of it out of him. Using the Marvel method, points out his stories on the grid and doing detailed plots for each issue, funneling the story, writes a full script. And his brushwork is typically good and powerful as other work. Okay. Todd McFarlane was influenced by his work. Again, a lot of this is a history of him again, as we've spoken about. I'm looking into upstart associates. Why do you do that? Resource sharing, close collaboration, professional networking. Again, there's quite a bit of initiative here. The membership changed over time. Also mentioned by Chaikin's wife, Stalin. So Simon had known each other, was living in the same Queen's apartment. The two friends, all American, Stalin rented the apartment. They stayed to the middle left. Simon up to 1987. Environment as a cool place to be, also competitive. Data coming along, there's mostly the American flag getting done. It was getting to see other guys at work. If you had problems, you could talk them over with them. Being part of a student means that you get to interact with other creative people that can fire your juices up. As he hardly ever talk and plays music because nobody wants to interfere with anybody getting their job done. It's quite a Science is there almost the longest it appears, at least from the beginning. So it was a working environment, but just very competitively focusing on their work. They could share ideas, of course, but it's very, very focused environment, it sounds like. There wasn't much sort of hijinks, social antics. Well, Virginia Upstairs was a pressure cooker chance to do that. Got to see working artists. Howard was super workaholic, so I learned when I got a store, it wasn't like now I can relax. Discover working for someone meant a higher velocity than school. That was really great because there were no surprises of what being a working class was about. A year-long crash course. They expelled colleagues making tools exponentially became experience I forever cherish. Okay. So it's a very highly productive space, it sounds like. So Chaikin was part of it. I haven't looked at Chaikin yet, but Simonson was in that. Stalin was there. I remember if we looked at Stalin before, maybe ILI for him. What else? What was Walt Simonson like to work with? One of his beloved, collaborative, and easygoing creators. His passion, meticulous craftsmanship, and both epic world building and quiet character moments. That speaks of a deep trust and harmony shares with his writers and editors. His co-created scripts with dynamic pacing and cinematic layouts. For double duty work ethic, as well he frequently writes and draws his own books. So he likes that autonomy. He likes that independence. He understands and demands of the page intimately. Clear plots and thoughtful panel layouts. Loyalty to his team. Long-time relationships with trusted peers such as colorist Laura Martin, John Workman, to do their jobs. So there's quite a bit. There is introverted ethics there. One of the most approachable figures in comics. So fixture at conventions. Incredibly generous ambassador of medium with happy engagement with his audience. What else? Promethean talent in the field. I'm just doing comics. Right. He doesn't Jack Cohen, not challenge Jack Cohen do his stuff. There's a lot of stuff I did that I find hard to imagine doing myself, like Bullseye. Let's go to the back of the 1950s. Of course, I'm very inspired by his work, but I think to some degree we have parallel interests. There's some old pre-Marvel Kirby stories where he did a full variation a couple of times. Not a methodological interest that's clear from the Fourth World. So mythology predates my knowing Jack stuff. I was reading mythology back in junior high and high school. I remember the first time I came across Beowulf. I didn't discover Marvel comics. I was in college. There's parallel interest there. What I would like to do mainly is the stuff use stuff as a springboard and go off in my own direction. I understand what he's doing, at least. I think I do. I understand what the underlying thematic material is. I think trying to play out all the themes he's pulled in the fourth world. There was such a rich material there. Working on one monthly book that resonates with me in a way that makes it really interesting to go back and play with. Said when you were in fifth grade, you were supposed to Beowulf. Is that the essence of your work in comics? You were going into mythology, working in comics. There are two particular interests. When I was younger, mythology and science fiction, and both of these informed my work. Not only a science fiction fan now as I was 20, 30 years ago in the 60s and early 70s, a lot of sci-fi, so I'm very well versed in that material, and I had an interest in fantasy time, Lord of the Rings. Tolkien Mountain out fantasy series, entire series. I'm really interested in what Tolkien called secondary world creation, one of the things we do in comics, because mainstream comic has a large shared universe, but it all curse continuity under our breaths, and sometimes deservedly so, as far as I'm concerned. I like part of what it bestows a rich complexity, material that you can really mine and work in a way that helps with sort of with rereading because it enlarges them, depends on the writer, of course the material, but such a fertile field for the imagination. Because I've stayed with mainstream comics for a long time. Let's be more precise about it. I get the New Gods. I'm not sure I get Kirby. Walker told me that he thought that one of the things popular fiction did was retell all truths, and paraphrasing him, hopefully I'm not mistaking his original intent. It was quite perceptive and not necessarily obvious. Jack's Fourth World work seems particularly good illustration of the popular fiction telling old truths. I think Jack did look at a great deal of real world material and subsumed his fourth world fiction. A quick example, the anti-life equation of Dr. Black Rel is the outside control of all living thought. Not a bad comic book restatement of the essence of fascism as a form of social organization where the will of the people subordinated to the will of his state. To old fashion as a name, but always remade, always renewed, always a threat. So thing I see in the fourth world, such evil always exists, which is why I think thematically it's possible to reinvent the material and still be true to what Jack was doing. But I'm not only thinking I get the fourth world, which was an element of fan reaction to Orion I found interesting. Most reaction has been positive, seems to be a great deal, but of course you always react more to the negative stuff. The first book I've worked on where I can see some of the readers giving a negative reaction to the 5 issues of Orion based on what I got as external agendas. It speaks a lot. Jack has worked on nature versus nurture. Scott Free lost his seat in heaven, and somehow it didn't seem to bother him. Centered guy in the fourth world, seems very likable, but for me, not very interesting to write. These interesting heroes. He's tremendously well adjusted. He's so likable. Here's a guy who's the son of heaven, lost his birthright, what hell, escaped to be a normal pleasant fellow. He doesn't like writing about pleasant fellows. That's what Orion was fascinating because the tug between his two halves embodies a conflict between eugenesis and apocalypse. And the fulcrum of all the action makes him complex to me, a character for the writing promise. Some divergent opinions about the original fourth world material. Yeah, Nazi Germany did have a very large element in Jack's vision of evil. That's true. In troop formation, a goose stepping, well, I'm not saying modeling a vision of evil and not specifically, and keeping the theme of evil in mind. Obviously thinking of bigger themes in the book. There's entertainment, there's art. Entertainment might be defined as to provoke a response from an audience, and art is to seek the truth. It's the responsibility you have in being in an entertainment medium to reveal. I don't think in big concepts like that. I'm cynical about art because it's so easy to manipulate and bullshit about. Art, as it's mostly encountered, is one more business. I mean, New York art galleries, fine art, it's just like any other business, depending a great deal on stuff that has nothing to do with the actual quality of or thought of the work. Most of my feeling about whether or not we're doing art, whatever that might mean, is that it's not really a decision that's up to us. It's a decision to be rendered by posterity. So I put that aside. It's too big a question to handle. Think about these close concepts, I'm going to freeze. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to tell stories that have a degree of truth in them, mostly old truths, whether it's light entertainment or heavy. I'm trying to tell stories I think will be interesting, wherever that may take me. I don't want to power myself trying to decide if I should be creating art with capital A this week. I'm just trying to tell stories that I would have enjoyed reading, so that speak to me. The idea is hopefully because they speak to me, they'll speak to others. The part a lot is it's like telling a joke. If I hear a joke, I don't think it's funny. I'm going to tell it to you, and I hope that you might find it amusing. If a joke and I think it's a riot, I pass it on. It's the old idea of a Greek philosopher, Protagoras. Man is the measure of all things. I'm the measure of the stories I tell. The idea that if I could tell stories that feel have some validity, but they may find an audience who will be touched by them because they'll strike a chord or resonance with a reader. In terms of the larger issues of art and truth and so on, but I'm not convinced you can think about that stuff and go out and do it, at least not without a very large BS quotient. Work on the human scale, art and truth get decided on later. So idealistic principles and abstract concepts, he'd rather keep it quite practical and realistic. It's grounded in the sense of, okay, I'm just telling you a story. I'm not going to get very hoity-toity with it. It's not something grandiose in that respect. He does cover grandiose concepts, absolutely, but he's not interested in what's the word? In dramatizing around that. He sort of burst that bubble quite quickly. I don't like to think of things in that sort of way. Say goes into details. He facility as a comic book artist who's worked in the field for 25 years and have a talent to do, I believe, effective comic book stories. You work in the medium of superheroes, so you don't want to go there into defining what you do as art, but why not? Because I'm not sure what purpose it would serve. I'm too suspicious that such thoughts could become self-serving. I don't want to go around with the back of my hand nailed to my forehead, proclaiming my suffering for my art. That's probably the main the problem-solving nature of my RISD education speaking. It's an objective view after being brought up a scientist's home. I like to be commercial because I want to have a job next week. I hope a lot of my work is commercial. I don't worry about it a lot either. If every comment I did folded after 3 issues, I'd probably sweat more. I aren't doing that well as a business right now compared to what they were doing. So again, it's the rejection of the extroverted ethics and sort of introverted logic, hoity-toity, um, sort of grandiose ideals for a more sort of commercial practicality there. So yeah, I'm thinking more and more LIE. I think that helps to solidify it more. You know, when you're young, you work with by leaps and bounds rapidly. I visualize the graph curve your improve. He's done it again. He does this a lot. He talks about a curve and development of his improvement over time, the development of his competence over time in doing something. He's interested in that as well. He's interested in commerciality. The what's it called? The Star um this first comic book very much about a commercial business as mercenaries. That's an ongoing theme here, which balanced with the blending of both the extrovert intuition and the introvert intuition, and also the energy and dynamism of his art, which suggests, I think, some degree of extrovert sensation, which makes it a bit Kirby-esque because there's similar balance of things in terms of the introvert intuition and the extrovert sensation. All those things are leading me to think LIE makes the most sense for him. So thank you, Isaac. Thank you for that. Let's now move on to Warren Hastings. Who is Warren Hastings? Hang on. It's one, I'm assuming. He was a British colonial administrator who served as the first Governor General of the Presidency of Fort William from 1773 to 1785. Or water, I'm doing this. Succeeding his early role as Governor of Bengal from 1772. During this tenure, he centralized British administrative control by abolishing the dual government system established after the Battle of Plassey. It divided revenue and judicial powers between the East India Company and the Nawab of Bengal, thereby addressing fiscal chaos and corruption that exacerbated the Bengal famine in 1770. Implemented revenue reforms, the decennial settlement experiments and standardization of land assessments and judicial innovations, district civil courts and the introduction of Muslim personal law codes, alongside Hindu ones to respect indigenous systems. Militarist policies supported campaigns like the First Anglo-Maratha War and actions against the Rohillas. Despite controversial methods, contributed to the consolidation of company dominance over fragmented Indian principalities, the collapse amid threats from Marathas, Mysore, and French influences. He fostered cultural engagement by patronizing, sorry. Yeah, it's true. I think that is interesting. Collapse and threats from Marathas. Patronizing Persian translations of Indian texts. And supporting scholars like Nathaniel Halhead, laying groundwork for Orientalist studies but preserved indigenous knowledge amid colonial expansion. Turned to Britain was overshadowed by impeachment proceedings initiated by Edmund Burke, charged with corruption, extortion, and judicial misconduct in cases like those involving Nanda Kumar and the Begums of Oud, reflecting Whig opposition to company autonomy and Pitt's regulatory reforms. 7-year trial in the House of Lords, he was acquitted on all accounts, vindicating his administration's necessity in stabilizing British India during a precarious phase of imperial overreach. Okay. It's quite a competent person, it seems. Right. He implemented revenue reforms in Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa, using a system of auctioning revenue farming rights for 5-year terms to enhance collection efficiency. It's a quinquennial approach, while experimental and later refined, shifted from the prior chaotic Ijara system and generated more predictable income in the East India Company, with collections rising from approximately 2.7 million rupees. He also established a board of revenue to supervise collections centrally, relocating the treasury from Murshidabad to Calcutta to curb local corruption and integrate fiscal oversight with executive authority. Criticism primarily advanced by Burke centered on allegations of financial corruption, extortion of Indian rulers, judicial education, unjust wars. He charged Hastings with accepting illicit presents totaling hundreds of thousands of pounds, purportedly for personal gain. These were framed as systematic bribery, undermining British moral authority in India. Defense, including his own testimony and trial evidence, contended that such payments were standard diplomatic practices and Mughal influenced politics, often redirected to company exigencies. Rohilla War drew accusations of him profiting from the subjugation statement of the Rohilla Afghans by allying with the Nawab of Oud. Critics portrays a mercenary aggression, exacerbating regional instability. In rebuttal, demonstrated the arrangement to settle pre-existing Rohilla debts to Oud and preempted an Afghan invasion threat to British Bengal. A defensive necessity accompanies an outnumbered forces. Okay. Interpretations have evolved significantly since his acquittal, letting broader shifts in attitude toward British imperialism and governance in India. Early assessments, influenced by Burke's prosecution, emphasized allegations of corruption and tyranny, portraying as emblematic of unchecked company abuses. Though contemporaries like William Wilberforce defended his necessity in stabilizing Bengal amid post-Mughal chaos. By Victorian era, views rehabilitated him as an empire builder with figures like Macaulay, issued critical but later historiography, Gleig's biography, credited with foundational reforms including revenue stabilization after the famine and judicial codification. 20th century scholarship Actually, Marshall analysis reframed the impeachment as politically motivated by Fox North coalition fears of company autonomy rather than substantiated personal graft. However, charge of financial impropriety, such as those involving the Begums of Oud, lacked empirical proof of enrichment beyond company needs, attributing them to evidentiary gaps in pre-modern accountability system. Indian nationalism amplified criticisms, as they would, viewing Hastings through a lens of colonial exploitation. Recent scholarship countered this by highlighting empirical successes such as curbing private trade abuses, exacerbated the famine's toll. This patron of Orientalist scholarship, including founding the Asiatic Society to preserve Sanskrit texts amid Mughal decline. Debates persist on the moral calculus of his realpolitik, harsh suppressions versus pragmatic alliances that averted broader anarchy, but causal analyses prioritizes causal role and transition from company adventurism to structured role with local endorsements. Bengali ballads praising him, challenging ideologically driven post-colonial narratives often overlook primary accounts of Indian agency. Modern reassessments defend him against systemic bias in Burkean rhetoric, which conflated with cultural unfamiliarity with ethical lapse, while acknowledging wartime excesses as contextually inevitable in a region where rival powers routinely employed similar tactics. Posits Hastings as a transitional figure whose innovations, centralized revenue collection yielding £3 million annually by 1785, it's a huge amount of money back then, and anti-corruption edicts against covenanted servants laid empirical groundwork for Cornwallis's reforms, meriting recognition beyond politicized indictments. Okay. Let's watch a YouTube video. We might potentially have found another LIE, but we shall see.
Hello everyone, I'm George from Ireland. So carry on talking about Warren Hastings around the front of his house. So I thought I'll probably never come here again. Take this opportunity, more picturesque this, and it looks like we're in a deep England context. We're actually not that far from London, about 17 miles from Marble Arch, which maybe the western beginning of London, or maybe 18 miles from Trafalgar Square, that statue, Charles I and the equestrian one. All measurements from London are measured from the base of that statue. So yeah, you see what it's like. This will obviously be a more modern edition over here with the Greek columns up the front. So anyway, when he died, I'm not sure who inherited this because he never wed. He had no children.
He never wed, had no children.
So a sleeping dictionary would have helped.
Married to his work.
It really ordered him more than hindered. He was learning because the Muslims were a slight majority in Bengal.
Hang on, what's that?
They inherited this because he never wed.
Right.
He had no children. I don't think he took an Indian mistress. So a sleeping dictionary would have helped him learn Urdu. It really ordered him more than hindered. He was learning because the Muslims were a slight majority in Bengal.
I missed. Hang on, what did you just say there?
He took an Indian mistress. So a sleeping dictionary would have helped him learn Urdu. It really ordered him more than hindered. He was learning.
Right.
Because the Muslims were a slight majority in Bengal. Of course, they mostly spoke Bengali, but the British Raj was extending into what we now call Uttar Pradesh or Bihar, presidency of Fort William, because the East India Company had three presidencies. One was Fort William, or Bengal, they sometimes call it. Another one is Fort George, which was Madras or Chennai city, has been called for 20 plus years. And then Bombay presidency, that's well Mumbai now, but that included Maharashtra up into Gujarat, Sindh, I'm not sure whatever else, maybe a bit further south. Remembering that the East India Company began on the littoral, just a few ports, pimples on the face of India, but gradually extended its tentacles into the hinterland. So this is what imperialism can buy you. And he doesn't seem to be troubled by qualms of conscience over his conduct. and the shareholders of the East India Company, they were most satisfied with what he was doing because it worked to their emolument. So as a close confidant of Robert Clive, had to organize military campaigns despite having no formal military training. Remember, the French were a considerable presence in India, and it was touch and go whether they would prevail. They could have easily thrashed the Britons and driven them out of the subcontinent, in which case India would have fallen under French dominion, but that didn't transpire.
So,
he was
not many
building alliances.
moral
He
qualms.
was audacious when he needed to be,
Audacious.
circumspect at other times, good man
And
manager,
circumspect.
shrewd,
So a
trying to
good
counter
mix of introvert,
the
intuition,
England
extrovert sensation there.
thinking.
Good
So
of
he
character,
accused of
maybe.
various things, huge scale peculation, and unlawfully killing an Indian prince, and so forth. But as I say, he was cleared of all the accusations were leveled against him. I'll show you a bit of the vista. Now you can't see the Thames now because of these trees behind. I presume they weren't there when he was here, because the River Thames is just beyond that. So this immaculately kept lawn slopes down to the river, and of course people used to come and go by a river that was often faster than the muddy roads. The turnpike trusts really just improving them in his lifetime. So although the river froze solid in the winter, freezes very easily. This chap could speak fluent Persian, and he had Sir William Jones, that judged the High Court of Calcutta, found the Asiatic Society. They took guidance from Hindu pundits and Islamic ulema about codes of laws that was far more ancient. gmail.com, that's on PayPal.
So what else there is? What's this like? I hope this is watchable.
हॅलो विद्यार्थी मित्रांनो, टेक्स्टबुक सुपर कोचिंग मध्ये तुमच्या सगळ्यांचं स्वागत आहे. विद्यार्थी मित्रांनो, आज तुमच्यासाठी एक स्पेशल टॉपिक मी घेऊन आलेलो आहे. हा टॉपिक तुम्हाला प्रत्येक परीक्षेमध्ये
I'm not going to understand this, unfortunately. Maybe I could translate. Maybe see if I can have like a translation.
हॅलो विद्यार्थी मित्रांनो, टेक्स्टबुक सुपर कोचिंग मध्ये तुमच्या सगळ्यांचं स्वागत आहे. विद्यार्थी मित्रांनो, आज तुमच्यासाठी एक स्पेशल टॉपिक मी घेऊन आलेलो आहे. हा टॉपिक तुम्हाला प्रत्येक परीक्षेमध्ये कामी येणार आहे, आणि या टॉपिकवर वारंवार प्रश्न विचारला जात आहे, आणि या टॉपिकचं नाव आहे गव्हर्नर जनरल आणि व्हॉइसरॉय. तर विद्यार्थी मित्रांनो, आज आपण एक अतिशय महत्वाचा गव्हर्नर जनरल या ठिकाणी शिकणार आहे. त्याने भारत देशामध्ये काय काय महत्वाच्या गोष्टी आणि महत्वाचं योगदान दिलेलं आहे ते मुद्दे आपण या ठिकाणी रिवाइज करणार आहे, आणि त्यावर परीक्षेमध्ये कसे प्रश्न विचारला. हॅलो विद्यार्थी मित्रांनो, टेक्स्टबुक सुपर कोचिंग मध्ये तुमच्या सगळ्यांचं स्वागत आहे. विद्यार्थी मित्रांनो, आज तुमच्यासाठी एक स्पेशल टॉपिक मी घेऊन आलेलो आहे. हा टॉपिक तुम्हाला प्रत्येक परीक्षेमध्ये कामी येणार आहे, आणि या टॉपिकवर वारंवार प्रश्न विचारला जात आहे, आणि या टॉपिकचं नाव आहे गव्हर्नर जनरल आणि व्हॉइसरॉय. तर विद्यार्थी मित्रांनो, आज आपण एक अतिशय महत्वाचा गव्हर्नर जनरल या ठिकाणी शिकणार आहे. त्याने भारत देशामध्ये काय काय महत्वाच्या गोष्टी आणि महत्वाचं योगदान दिलेलं आहे ते मुद्दे आपण या ठिकाणी रिवाइज करणार आहे, आणि त्यावर परीक्षेमध्ये कसे प्रश्न विचारले जाऊ शकतात तो मुद्दा सुद्धा आपण या ठिकाणी क्लिअर करणार आहे आणि कव्हर सुद्धा करणार आहे. तर चला तर विद्यार्थी मित्रांनो, आज आपण एका नवीन मुद्द्याला हात घालूया. विद्यार्थी मित्रांनो, गुढीपाडवा हा जो सण आहे तो मराठी नवीन वर्षाची सुट्टी तुम्हाला वाटणार आहे.
Okay, that's the fella. All right.
विद्यार्थी मित्रांनो, तुम्हाला फोटोमध्ये जी व्यक्ती दिसत आहे दुसरी तिसरी कोणी नसून बंगालची पहिले गव्हर्नर जनरल वॉरन हेस्टिंग आहे. आता तुम्ही म्हणाल की सर, गव्हर्नर जनरल या शब्दाचा अर्थ कसं काय होतो? तर लक्षात घ्या, हा जो भारत देशाचा नकाशा तुम्हाला या ठिकाणी दिसत आहे, तर या भारत देशाच्या नकाशामध्ये ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी जी आहे ती भारतामध्ये 1608 ला येते. जेव्हा ती 1608 ला येते तेव्हा ती भारत देशामध्ये आपल्या कॉलनी फॉर्म करते. कॉलनी म्हणजे राहण्याचं ठिकाण. ओके, आणि ह्या ज्या कॉलनीज आहे या कॉलनीज ते भारताच्या पूर्व किनाऱ्यावर, दक्षिण किनाऱ्यावर आणि पश्चिम किनाऱ्यावर फॉर्म करते. तर याला प्रेसिडेन्सी असं म्हटलं जातं. काय म्हटलं जातं? प्रेसिडेन्सी. प्रेसिडेन्सी म्हणजे एक विभाग, आणि या विभागाचा जो प्रमुख आहे त्याला गव्हर्नर असं म्हटलं जातं. तर हे 3 गव्हर्नर भारत देशामध्ये अपॉइंट केले गेले होते. एक होता बेंगॉलला, दुसरा होता बॉम्बेला, तिसरा होता मद्रासला. मग भारत देशाच्या इतिहासामध्ये 1773चा रेग्युलेटिंग ऍक्ट येतो, आणि या रेग्युलेटिंग ऍक्ट नुसार या बंगालच्या गव्हर्नरला पुन्हा एक जी जास्त अतिरिक्त लावला जातो. आता बंगालचा गव्हर्नर हा गव्हर्नर जनरल म्हणून ओळखला जातो. आणि असा असणारा
जनरल
होता तो होता वॉरेन हेस्टिंग. असा कोण होता? वॉरेन हेस्टिंग. म्हणून वॉरेन हेस्टिंगला बंगालचा पहिला गव्हर्नर जनरल असं म्हटलं. मुद्दा क्लिअर झाला का? येस.
Okay. Anything else?
बंगालचा पहिला गव्हर्नर जनरल कोण? वॉरेन हेस्टिंग. मग
Okay.
याचं काय रे? तर याचं काम होतं की बंगाल हा जो संपूर्ण प्रांत आहे हा याला गव्हर्न करणे आणि या बाकीच्या 2 प्रांतांवर कंट्रोल ठेवणे.
No, that's not the time to stop translating the subtitles.
तर आयोग तुम्हाला वारंवार
Okay.
वॉरेन हेस्टिंगवर प्रश्न विचारतो. वॉरेन हेस्टिंगने भारत देशामध्ये बेंगॉलमध्ये काय काय सुधारणा केल्या, त्याचं काय कॉन्ट्रीब्युशन होतं, याच्यावर तुम्हाला महाराष्ट्रातल्या सगळ्या स्पर्धा परीक्षांमध्ये प्रश्न विचारला जातात. तर वॉरेन हेस्टिंग भारत देशामध्ये 1773 पासून तर 1785 पर्यंत बंगालचा गव्हर्नर
Okay, I can't watch this.
विद्यार्थी मित्रांनो, याच्याच कारकिर्दीमध्ये
Not going to be what I need. Right. Full audio book, 4 hours. No. What's this? Him at the trial.
The impeachment of Warren Hastings, the first Governor-General of India, was not merely a legal proceeding. It was a philosophical confrontation over the ethics of British imperial rule. Spanning 7 years from 1788 to 1795, the trial became a stage for Edmund Burke to challenge the foundations of colonial governance. Burke saw Hastings not just as an individual administrator, but as a symbol of unchecked power, corruption, and the moral dangers of empire. His prosecution was a passionate indictment of British rule in India, forcing Britain to confront the ethical dilemmas of its expanding dominion. Edmund Burke, one of the most influential political thinkers of his time.
Oh, wait a bit. That's like Edmund Burke at one point. He will declare creative laying the foundation of British Empire in India. He's an energetic organizer and reformer, which seems to be the case. He led the forces of the East India Company against the coalition native states and the French. In the end, the well-organized British side held its own, while France lost influence in India. Accused of corruption and impeached, but he was eventually acquitted. The Privy Council in 1814. Quickly excelled as a top scholar, was forced to leave at 16 when his uncle died. Especially for diligence, spent free time learning about India, mastering Urdu and Persian. To work on promotion when he was sent to Kasim Bazaar. So, yeah, very intelligent, clearly very hardworking, very energetic. 85, goodness. What else? Hastings supported in Edinburgh East India Club, a number of other gentlemen. Reportedly elegant entertainment for Hastings when visited Edinburgh as toast of prosperity during its residence in India, and wish that the virgin talents which deserved them be remembered with gratitude. Walked for £54,000 in estate in Gloucestershire. Remodeled the house designed by Selma Pepper's Cockerell with classical Indian decoration and gardens landscaped by John Davenport. He's made a fellow of Royal Society. Apparently, he's technically insolvent on his death. Goodness. He was old, 85 at the time, but administrative ethos and legacy. In the last quarter, many senior administrators realized that to govern Indian society, it's essential to learn its various religions, social and legal customs and precedents. The importance of such knowledge to the colonial government was in Hastings' mind when he embarked in 1784. in his introduction to the English translation of the Bhagavad Gita by Wilkins. Every accumulation of knowledge, and especially such as is attained by social communication with people over whom we exercise dominion found on the right of conquest, is useful to the state. It attracts and conciliates distant affections. It lessens the weight of the chain by which the natives are held in subjection, and it imprints on the hearts of a countryman the sense of obligation and benevolence. Every instance which brings their real character home to observation will impress us with a more generous sense of feeling for the natural rights and teach us to estimate them by the measure of our own. Such instances can only be obtained in their writings. These will survive when the British dominion in India shall have long ceased to exist, and when the sources which once yielded of wealth and power are lost to remembrance. So this is also someone who is interested in putting himself into other people's perspectives and learning the customs by which he can then do that. And in doing that, further shoring up the administrative rule of the British in India. He had great respect for the ancient scripture of Hinduism and set the British position on governments looking back to the earliest precedents possible. It allowed Brahmin advisors to mould the law, as no Briton thoroughly understood Sanskrit until Sir William Jones. And then a literal translation was little use. It needed to be elucidated by British commentators well versed in the law and its application. This approach accentuated the British Hindu caste system to extend the frameworks of other religions, at least in the recent century, been somewhat more flexibly applied. So British influence on the fluid social structure of India can largely be seen as solidification of the privileges of a Hindu caste system through the influence of exclusively high caste Hindu scholars advising the British on their laws. Where British translators and interpreters read in the Arthashastra, a caste system in India, actual wording speaks of Varna and Jati, skin color and birth, i.e. clan. It speaks of the four societal classes, not castes, from upper class Brahmin to lower class Shudra. Interesting. He wanted the Bhagavad Gita translated into English. He says that to a first translation by Charles Wilkins, introduction to it, which appeared on the 4th of October 1784, which we just read. Let's see. Rule in India had not changed, but the French position was now much weaker. It had an efficient system in operation. Hastings' multiple wartime operations needed large sums of money, and London sent nothing. Methods of using local treasures became the main line of attack on any impeachment brought against him. Issuing control of the East India Company's opium monopoly in the same year, he sent company troops to support the Wazir of Oud, against the Rohillas. Troops were paid by the Wazir for their assistance in a short campaign, while enlarging the company's main ally in northern India was the first of several wars that harmed Hastings' reputation. All right. Oh.
Believed that empire should be governed by principles of justice rather than raw power and profit. In his view, the British presence in India was a responsibility, not merely an opportunity for exploitation. He warned that imperial rule, if left unchecked, could devolve into tyranny, corrupting both the rulers and the ruled. His prosecution of Hastings was not just about alleged financial misconduct. It was a sweeping denunciation of how Britain exercised its authority over subject peoples. Burke framed the trial as a battle between morality and expediency. In one of his most famous speeches, he declared, "The British Empire was acquired by violence and maintained by injustice. It is our duty to call its servants to account." For Burke, Hastings was not simply an administrator grappling with difficult choices. He was the embodiment of imperial excess, someone whose decisions reflected the greed and moral failings of colonial governance. Warren Hastings had been appointed Governor-General of India in 1773, a time when the East India Company
highly competent,
exercised immense,
pragmatic,
unregulated,
genuinely open-mindedness in understanding our perspectives, but also at risk of being seen as self-serving in his pragmatism.
And impose order on colonial governance.
Very diligent and hard-working as well.
Pragmatic responses to the chaotic political landscape of India. However, several of his policies became the foundation of Burke's case against him. The Rohilla War, 1774, was one of the most infamous incidents, in which Hastings allowed the Nawab of Oudh to invade Rohilkhand, in exchange for British support, an act that led to widespread slaughter. His role in the confiscation of wealth from the Begums of Oudh further reinforced accusations of greed and exploitation. For Burke, these were not mere strategic decisions, they were manifestations of colonial violence. He argued that Hastings had systematically abused his power, treating Indian rulers as disposable subjects rather than sovereign leaders entitled to dignity. The trial unfolded in Westminster Hall, one of Britain's grandest and most historic venues. Unlike previous legal proceedings, this impeachment was more than a courtroom battle. It was a theatrical confrontation. Burke's speeches electrified audiences, transforming the case into a national debate about Britain's imperial identity. His rhetorical mastery turned Hastings into a villain, a man whose governance exposed the darker realities of colonial rule. Burke passionately argued that Britain had no right to justify cruelty under the banner of empire. The British nation is not a gang of mercenary adventurers, but a people bound by laws and morality. The prosecution was supported by other notable figures, including Richard Brinsley Sheridan and Charles James Fox, who reinforced Burke's arguments by emphasizing the broader implications of unchecked colonial authority. Hastings' defense, meanwhile, portrayed him as a leader navigating the harsh realities of empire. His legal team argued that his decisions, though controversial, had been necessary to maintain stability and British interests. Hastings himself maintained that he had governed with an understanding of India's traditions and had made difficult choices for the greater good. After 7 years of proceedings, Hastings was acquitted in 1795, escaping legal punishment. However, the trial had far-reaching consequences. Though Hastings avoided conviction, Burke's prosecution had shifted public consciousness, exposing the moral ambiguities of empire. The debate surrounding the trial influenced future attitudes toward colonial governance and reinforced the idea that imperial administrators could and should be held accountable for their actions. Burke's arguments helped fuel later reformist movements that sought to impose ethical constraints on British colonialism. While Britain continued to expand its empire in the 19th century, the Hastings trial remained a reference point for discussions about the limits of imperial authority. The Hastings trial was a defining moment in British history, not because of its legal outcome, but because of its ideological impact. Burke's prosecution forced Britain to confront the uncomfortable reality that empire, if left unchecked, could become indistinguishable from tyranny. His insistence that colonial governance should be guided by justice rather than greed laid the groundwork for later critiques of imperialism. While Britain did not immediately abandon
There's but one law for all, namely the law of humanity, justice, equity, the cultural and moral standards. See more intelligible and local beliefs and competent and comparative crime rates. Good work. Survive and the British and the United States still exist. The source which it yields but willpower and national memberships to pronounce the Gita was the great originality of sublimity of conception, reasoning, and diction was unequaled, and the single exception was all the known religions of mankind. Now, the question: did he actually believe this, or was this a certain political expediency, which could also make sense for action versus ethics role? I'm not sure. He clearly cannot see anything that distinguishes Christianity from the other religions about which he knows. The incarnation of Christ more intelligible than those of Bishop. Europeans prevail over non-Europeans not because of superiority of Christianity, but for secular reasons, a free government, cold climate, and printing navigation. That make people better, that those who know the lower educated, uneducated class in England, so how much more rarely Christ in England than in India. Peter Marshall about a notebook of Warren Hastings, the Library of University of Minnesota. That is. But all we have. What is this quote by Warren Hastings? Let's take a look. In one of his dispatches to the court, directors observes the scale of power is evidently turned in our favor, and this is of more importance than would well be imagined in Europe, where the policy of the nations is regulated by principles the very reverse of those which prevail in Asia. There, in contest between nations, the weaker is held up by the support of its neighbors, who know how much their own safety depends on the preservation of a proper balance. But in Asia, the desire of partaking of the spoils of a falling nation and the dread of incurring the resentment of a stronger party are the immediate motives of policy. Every state wishes to associate itself with that power which has a decided superiority. So this ability to recognize differences in different places, in different cultural contexts, and it seems to me also embracing the extroverted sensation aspect of the latter, of that part of Asia. About his early life. Hastings of my Hester, 1990, was born. Bader's leading Warren, his older sister Anne. Young Warren was raised by his grandfather, in charity school. We've already seen that. Okay. Nothing else. Unassuming and mild-mannered until crossed. Born in the little hill village of Churchill, so an Anglican clergyman loses his mother in the week of his birth. He abandoned his father within 9 months as he had been married and up sticks to Barbados. Duke was adopted his mother's maiden name as a Christian name. The house where he was born still lives in the village. The first was to map the rock structure of England, becoming the founder of modern science of the process. Young Warren was taken by various family members, educated at a local school in Dalesford, and then, having been adopted by a wealthy uncle, was taken to London in 1740, where he attended the prestigious Westminster School, where he showed himself to have literacy and scholarly nous, but had to leave at 16 following the death of his uncle. He then headed out to Calcutta at 17 as a clerk, writer of East India Company, a trading company incorporated with Royal Charter in 1600 and established in Bengal. Then was British resident at Murshidabad, the court of the Nawab or Indian governor of Bengal, and then a member of the Bengal Council at Calcutta, the company's controlling body for its affairs in Bengal. He was in Bengal at the time of great political change, as the East India Company became top dog in the late 1750s, which the local Nawab relegated to the status of a supplicant. His first marriage had been in 1756 to the widowed Mary Buchanan. However, their two children didn't live long, and neither did Mary, who died in 1759. Okay, so he did marry. He didn't have children. He did have married, his kids did not survive, and then his wife died. His first stint in India would end in 1764, where he returned home, frustrated by divisions within the council and finding himself holding the minority view. He's back to subcontinent in 1769, as member and second in the Madras Council. Then in 1772, he was a governor of Bengal and president of the council. It was a pretty remarkable rise of the colonial greasy pole, so he hadn't quite hit 40. So from this time until 1785, he dominated Indian affairs, when he created the first and arguably most famous Governor General with a council of 4 members. Philip appointed from home, majority in council over Philip Francis opposed Hastings from the outset. However, the Regulating Act was aimed at extending government control over East India Company, making the newly created post of Governor General, which is a company appointment, subject to a government-appointed council. It was intended to rein in Hastings and his like. The finances had been in disarray, and one of Hastings' first jobs was to bring to trial the 2 chief fiscal ministers of Bengal, charged of being for embezzlement. Wrote down a corrupt official, Maharaja Nolkoma or Nanda Kumar, who had been employed to conduct the trial, but subsequently brought charges of corruption against Hastings himself, was tried and executed in 1775 on an old charge of forgery, a conclusion which brought strong public condemnation down on both Hastings and the Chief Justice, Sir Elijah Impey. It seemed they got Nanda Kumar bang to rights, but it smacked of revenge. So nothing not efficient, though. He undertook many legal and administrative reforms during which he appraised and landed estates and revised the assessment. So that like his council tax shake-up, we might hear him heading away. Improved justice administration, the organs of revenue from opium. It's made a mint from narcotics, that's true, and waged an enthusiastic war against the Marathas, Marathi-speaking group from the Western Deccan Plateau, all while making the East India Company's power of paramount persuasion across much of India. Sounds impressive, if a bit ruthless, although he was also respecting of Indian customs and culture. Not everyone was. Later British rulers would rebuild on his reforms, despite this attempt made to depose him. This was only thwarted intervention of the Supreme Court. Same year, 18 years after the loss of his first wife, he married again to another divorcee, the former wife of Baron Imhoff, a German officer. So his domestic life, he was spared further embarrassment, his professional one, by retirement from the council of his nemesis, Philip Francis, who he'd managed to wound in a pistol duel. Goodness. The previous year. He had been in conflict with a crown-appointed council of which Francis had been a prominent vocal member. He achieved peace, however, with Maratha states in 1882, and also with Hyder Ali, the rule of Mysore in 1784. Pistol duels were quite common back then. If I recall correctly, Alexander Hamilton, who we often typed LIE, also got hold of a pistol duel, although he didn't survive that one, unfortunately. Despite these successes, he resigned office and was going to send back to England, which he probably quickly regretted when he probably became the subject of parliamentary inquiry with impeachment, sought after outcome for his partiality, high-handedness, and alleged corruption. Why did he go back again? The crown-appointed council in which France had been a prominent and vocal member. He achieved peace, however, with the Maratha states, also with Hyder Ali, the ruler of Mysore, in 1784. So why did he resign and sail back? Among the charges brought by Whig opposition was the aid given to the Nawab of Oud against the Afghans, where he punished the Zemindar Benares for failing to comply with the demand for assistance in the First Maratha War. Then was connivance in the forfeiture of property belonging to the Begums, or Dowager Princesses of Oud. On these charges, he was impeached at the bar of the House of Lords. Trial of the century, duly beginning 1788 to Westminster Hall, the likes of Thomas More and Charles of Hesperus had been tried. Obviously, both of them had ended up having their heads severed from their bodies. Fate couldn't await Hastings, though, the last execution by decapitation having been over 40 years earlier. Under our bloody code, however, the death penalty could still be imposed for a number of offences, including embezzlement. There are some famous persons among the managers or conductors of the Commons, the Irish philosopher, politician, orator Edmund Burke, etc., etc., etc. Hastings had clearly accumulated some enemies in high places. The trial would go on for over 7 years by 145 sittings. He was exonerated, being acquitted on all charges unanimously on those affecting his personal honour. He left the court with honour intact, but his finances ruined. That's why he was insolvent at the age of 85, because he was trying to defend himself in court. The 80,000 that he brought back from India had been burnt up in court costs and expenses. East India Company came to his rescue, however, making generous provision for his later years. He passed the remainder of his days acting out of the role of country gentleman at his ancestral home of Delsford, which he brought back in 1788, apparently in fulfillment of childhood dream or ambition, state including the site of a family's medieval seat. A fellow of Royal Society and a Privy Council, received further honours both from the city and Parliament. In 1816, he rebuilt the Norman Church at Aylesford, which was built just 2 years later. He died at Aylesford aged 85. With Robert Clive, he's attributed with establishing the foundations of British India. His life has been written up countless times. Letters to his second wife have also been published. As a retired country gent, he was unassuming, mild-mannered, and of scholarly taste, much as he had been all his life, despite the fact that he was quite ruthless and fiercely pragmatic. Right. Less insightful than I would have hoped. Let's see if we can find that letter. Let's see. Let's see. Letters to his wife. Let's see. Warren Hastings was governor of India, treated the natives very cruelly, and was impeached. Descendants with slight variation in phraseology and spelling confronted the present writer conspicuously in the first sheet of every set of answers. Invited with large and generosity examination, tended for the very young to say what they knew about Warren Hastings, the rash confidence they had assumed, but here it was a question they could answer. Diluted Macaulay filtered through the minds of the governors into those of the girls, the verdict of that moment. Perfection, a curious fact leaped into prominence. Not one of the youthful historians knew or appeared to know. Hastings was triumphantly acquitted on every charge brought against him. Yet Macaulay does not attempt to deny the fact, though he does his best to minimize its significance. They can hardly have been omitted from their teaching. How has it been so completely escaped their memories? Further experience has introduced the conclusion that the same limitation of knowledge exists widely in the more surprising quarter. We know the verdict, writes with unconscious mendacity a viewer in a great daily, the name of which it were charity to withhold. Nothing edges of majority injustice, certainly not. But under review, the whole which was to justify the verdict. Okay. I've missed the verbiage which just finished, but disproved and kind of cut of all for his enemies. Their own Governor General, who had been sent out to ban the policy of Mr. Hastings, returned, like the honest fighter he was, to bless it. But okay, this is a general introduction. It's not the letters. Well, prejudices which have during so many years prevailed against me. I'm going to go a bit further. Ah, this is interesting information. Including the man in the street, blacks. Do simply labeled. Macaulay saw him as a man of blood and iron, marching through rapine to the establishment of an empire. Like the public brought up upon Macaulay has seen him since. While so great a difference doesn't change in the point of view make, Francis daily intercourse with him saw him as a timid, desperate, distracted being, weary of life. So it's a difference in the opinions of the two critics, both opposed to him, so strongly marked. Constructing the opinions of other contemporaries and from his correspondence outside the content of his book, a picture of a man. In the 50 volumes of letters received, included not a few letters written by Warren Hastings in the 60 years, there is a wealth of material which has hitherto only been casually used or even examined. No selection has been made in the binding and catalogue of the papers. It appears 4 or 5 times over. Its duplicates arrived by different channels. Personal letters, those to and from Mr. and Mrs. Woodman, the husband during his early career. In person, Ben Hastings was small and thin with a peculiarly massive forehead, a feature which was the more noticeable in that he grew bald very early. Greek writing, apparently from more tradition, says that he attributed his wretched constitution and stunted growth to the hardships endured at his first preparatory school in Newington Butts, he was a martyr to dyspepsia for the greater part of his life, and his letters testify to a Spartan regimen which kept him in health sufficient for the performance of his overwhelming duties, for in this task he found an ally in my promptitude and facility of sleeping, which had been my blessing through life, and have supported me under its worst trials. Fanny Burney's tender heart was repeatedly wrung by his pale, dejected, and harassed aspect when she saw him in Westminster Hall. His pained astonishment at the humiliations inflicted on him was quickly replaced by hysterical patience, interrupted by a single outburst of appeal to justice to court against the unfair letters of his accusers. In his letters to his Indian friends, he insisted repeatedly that Mr. Hastings felt the misery of a trial more acutely than he did. Like many other hard workers, he was at his best of times, best in times of greatest pressure, showing an apparently insatiable appetite for work, which would be succeeded when the pressure was removed by a species of mental lassitude. I brought from town, he writes to Sir John Doyley, a mind so much relaxed by the long and unusual dissipation which had undergone there, I fear you must have seen the effects of it in my letter, which was written more from its obligation than from the hope of communicating anything that you could be interested in reading, or I find pleasure in writing. It speaks of mental malady, which I've all my life been subject to, except I had a constant occupation of business grows daily more powerfully upon me, affects even my bodily powers, for I have not the same pleasure in riding as I used to have. Riding and driving has always been his favourite outdoor recreation, seems to have never have felt any inclination towards field sports, but to be enjoyed in those days comfortably near Calcutta. So it sounds to me he would exhaust himself repeatedly and be overwhelmed by the sheer amount of work he had an insatiable appetite for. That sounds very familiar. Was quite a thin man, potentially quite sickly. You could say the way he lived to 85. So clearly it wasn't that he was actually sick. He was just not very physically present, you could say, more mentally distractible. Um, hmm. Volunteers waiting for noodles of water up to our breasts. The occasional reminders of fervent. In English politics took little share. Hang on. 2 years ago, records of Hastings living in the neighbourhood of his home as a small man sitting huddled on his horse, watching the volunteers drill. His ability as a statesman, his wealth of information, his dauntless courage adds that his interests were wholly Indian. On his return to England, he knew nothing of British political parties, their objects, or their sympathy, save as regarded India. No opinion on questions which were matters of life and death to them. Macaulay finds initial crime in his one plunge into political arena in 1804. Necessary to know the feeling of the time to realize how deeply discredited and distrusted by both of the great parts at the moment. Pitt was considered absolutely unscrupulous. His state maxims about the end justify the means, convenience sacrifice the end, of trying simultaneously bless and curse the renewal of war with France, which had been saw in the Ministry of Moderate. That Pitt was seen that way. Pitt, I'm assuming I mean Pitt the Younger. It's kind of accused. Well, Hastings was essentially accused of by Burke. I know that Pitt would have. You should have typed in LIE. Maybe we should look at that again. I don't know, but I think LIE. Hastings hardly be blamed for his confidence in Addington, who had always shown him kindness and courtesy. It comes with the treachery of Pitt and the savagery of Fox. A little later, he is found watching with painful interest with Nelson and Wellington, whose treatment of the government reminded him of his own. So now to read that in 1905, Nelson was only waiting to bring his feet into British port to resign his command as a protest. The hard news received, but Hastings felt to that end not been properly appreciated. I do not rejoice for our victory, writes after Trafalgar. Tears into my eyes and struck a chill upon my heart. It is not, if I was not afraid of its being imputed to me as an affectation, put myself into mourning. I do mourn inwardly. With all honest men, he shared the indignation felt the attempt to involve Wellington guilty to Okay. Oft proved truth. So the will of India is the best school the nation can boast of, but from statesmen and generals. Hayes was little of a politician, however, was little of a politician. He was a keen practical philanthropist, was acknowledged an obligation of gratitude to his foster mother. There's a thing. Not very good introverted ethics, it sounds from this. Obligation of gratitude to foster mother, family which they kept from their mind. Here an earthly providence to every man, woman, child in the state, and in severe weather, gave orders for the day distribution of bread to the value of £6, probably £6 a week per head. Or 6 pennies, not sure. But his late endeavours were directed rather to the inculcation of self-support. 6 shillings, maybe. He's got the sewing, straw plaiting. What else? He's regarded as an authority. There's a facility in verse making as one of the monks of man of culture. And he dropped in poetry. Although we much have other things here. I was very well doing making Latin verses. As they classical originals, rather than authority. On both Latin and English verse, the works of your taste. His own school days. Mention that although attempts have been made to show he was ignorant of Indian languages, all the contemporary accounts agree in representing as a matter of Persian and the most important, but he never lost an opportunity of inquiring into beliefs and antiquities of the Hindus. This may have been done by interpretation. His friend Ironside pictures him at Benares, relaxing and unbending in Pundit hunting. Wilkins sends him a minute account of the worship of Sikh colony in Patna. He gave endless trouble to the task of discovering and codifying the most learned natives he could track to Calcutta, both Hindu and Mohammedan law. For mechanical pursuits, he had considerable taste. In 1770, when he'd only lately arrived in Madras, he sent home a plan for a pier there on the model of that at Margate, which is obviate the danger to come from the landing through the surf. Opinion foremost engineers of the day. He was making experiments with balloons, as was everyone in England and France at the time. Description of water wheels and other Indian machines remain in his handwriting. No extant artistic works, at least in the public recollections, was the patron of art who was generous and renowned. The government address, contrasting vividly with the state he maintained his public appearances. So, of a piece with a simple mode of life, was a simplicity of his dress. Yeah, again, very coherent with LIE here. A plain-looking man like any of us with a brown coat. Unostentatious and sensible is the description given of his dress by a lady visitor. Its plainness is mentioned again and again in his return to England. The gold-laced coat, which was a much marked of return Anglo Indian as a Hindu servant behind his chair, he abjured except on occasions of ceremony. On first reaching Calcutta, he requested his assistant to send him out 2 suits of clothes a year and 1 frock coat, merely for fashion. So that's the extroverted ethics role. He will only do it for the fashion. He won't. He's not interested in playing around with unconventional appearances. He wants to keep that very, very simple. He is someone who's out there to work effectively. So frugality and personal expenditure aroused against Hastings the suspicions of those who watched for his falling. man in position, unparalleled for his opportunities of making money dishonestly. His one extravagance, lavish gifts to his wife and to needy relatives. What became of all money that he must have made, that his opponents and prisoners have made it in his place? Of course, it was either spent or hoarded with dishonest intention. I say it was obvious, but hence arose the legend of gifts to royalty valued at £50,000. If he spent little upon himself, his letters leave us no doubt that he was surrounded by his eager throng of harpies from any public man. The majority of his relatives were in poor circumstances, appreciating their good fortune, possessing, as it were, a private gold mine in him. During the lifetime of his first wife, sent a large gift of money to her mother on her behalf, and after her death, her two daughters. He was greedy and shameless pensioners, reappearing in his later years. Mrs. Johnson, Mrs. Findlay, still highly undeserving, dependent on his bounty. Struck with the old man's mild and benign appearance, he enters into conversation with him and discovers that he is a nephew in India. Yeah, I'm reading this. LIE seems by far and away the most likely typing for him. When we finally combined. What else? A curious feature in Hastings' character, that though a capable leader of men, little insight into the minds of others. Now considering every possible step of an opponent before he would make any move himself, and he had left it on one record that Hastings was entirely destitute of this kind of provision, but extraordinary skill in extricating himself from the difficulty which he fell. Akin to this was his haphazardness, to coin a word, in his choice of subordinates. To him, the man who presented himself with assurances of loyalty was loyal. The man who discharged routine duties with zeal and fidelity was capable of dealing masterfully with great issues. In some cases, his confidence was justified. So here's the thing: the introverted ethics was his weak point. Third on whom he had heaped kindnesses repaid him with ingratitude. As Hastings, indeed, from all I can gather, all can observe, both of which are but little, he appears to be one of the greatest men now living as a public character. As a private one, his gentleness, candor, and soft manners and openness of disposition make him one of the most pleasing. He spoke with the utmost frankness of his situation and affairs, and with a noble confidence in his certainty of victory of his enemies, his consciousness of integrity and honor that filled me with admiration and esteem for him. And the greatest men living as a public characters. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, so I'm definitely getting the view of LIE for him. So this is the actual letter. Let's get to the actual letter. Still an introduction. Ah, here we go. This is where it starts. My dearest Marion, it's purpose to tell you that I've resolved to meet you tomorrow unless you would write before the time to fix my embarkation. My plans itself and my Phil Shearer at 2 o'clock in the afternoon should be about the beginning of the flood tide. Of course, the time that you will be at anchor. Shall carry my dinner with me and feel great pleasure in the project. Disappoint me, for I shall not choose to land at Chinchilla for many reasons. I'll not quarrel with Mrs. Mott, certainly turn her out of her place. Adieu, my beloved. There's letters to fix my announcement. Crane neck coach, entirely in the present taste, with a genteel Rutland roof, in the pleasing lilac colour. Everything tried to misleading attention. The following quaint advertisement appeared in the Bengals. Okay, fine. He wouldn't have written that. No, that didn't sound like him. That's an advertisement. His advertisement much the same in those days as NAS. What else? One line last night by the post to tell you that I was well. I've since reviewed free from you. That is to say, form 2 half time. Much pleased with your visit to Mrs. Sands for 3 good reasons. But it's proved so welcome. I wish you would be so good as to leave off dreaming, or that you would mend your dreams. There, I have answered your letters, except the PS, which I've almost missed. Boxes are all arrived. The Kingston and Free are all there safely lodged in the room where your tales work. Most elegant. I've seen the most elegant chariot. It is ill-shaped, has a patch in this form behind and a crack all across. I judge it to be old and vamped, and besides, I do not like it. Last night I received 2 letters from the Cape, sent for your entertainment. Doesn't happen to have catch cold, if an opinion, so that your complaints proceeded from weakness, from the effects of the foul air, how you potentially arrived to relieve you from it. He desires you to take the bark and decoction, so your bark beer. Give yourself the trouble to study the first prescription for the same purpose, because he says you cannot have the ingredients required by it. Read the letter which I sent you from the summer. Do you remember an invitation which I made in your name to Lewis Davidson to send his children hither? You write to her. It's quite practical, sort of wry at the same time, critical in places. It does, I think, fit an LIE's writing. Well, it was cracked and flawed thus. I put up another broken one with only one crack like this and no flaw. He's quite particular about this. It will do for this Act of Parliament. I've just reckoned up the number of people that have successfully shared my time this morning under privacy. Compliments to your companions. No bad news for you. Bring Malady, 1 or 2 funny letters. Note, hurry. This is such a good source, I must say. Right. So yeah, I think LIE. I think that's pretty clear from all this. So yeah, thank you, Claudia. Greatly appreciated. Thank you everyone for tuning in as well. If any of you want to learn to type like I have been able to type these 2 people, please consider getting the Type Mastery Pathway, a link to which is included in the description under this video. And that will give you the skill sets you would need in order to be able to look at people, to understand their underlying personality type, what makes them do what they do, to make sense of information that you're presented with in order to put together a cohesive typing of the person. So if that's something, a skill set you want to develop, please take the type mastery pathway. And if you want me to type you to do a deep dive into your own personality, I also have a link in the description for how to book a diagnostic interview. So thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. Hope you all have a lovely rest of your week. Well, a lovely next week, I should say, and take care. Bye-bye.